Chapter 967. I beg you. I only need a few copper coins to buy some potatoes or corn. The boy clearly ignored the warning in Zhang Cheng's tone. Not only did he not leave, but he kept moving forward. His whole body was curled up as if he was afraid. If it was a normal person, they would have been deceived by his weak appearance. But Zhang Cheng would not. Just as the boy stepped within 1 meter, he was shocked to find that his feet were frozen to the ground. No matter how hard he tried, his feet could not leave the ground even by an inch. What was even more frightening was that the bone-chilling white ice was quickly spreading up his legs. It would not be long before his entire body would be frozen into a lump of ice. Young man, you have 1 minute to tell me who is the mastermind behind this. After 1 minute, you will become a beautiful ice sculpture. Zhang Qing did not waste any time and directly gave him an ultimatum. Because even if he did not read the boy's thoughts, he could still see some clues from the boy's strange movements. Without a doubt, a normal person would not curl up their body when approaching a target, unless they planned to hide their eyes and movements, and then wait for the moment they approach to launch a surprise attack. Simply put, this boy who pretended to be pitiful was actually an experienced assassin. He specialized in using his identity and age as a cover to attack his target. Unfortunately, if it was in the past where morals and material civilization were more developed, he might have been able to deceive many people. But now it was indeed an extremely dark, cruel, and barbaric society. Anyone who was overflowing with sympathy would not be able to survive for long before being devoured by the cannibalistic environment. See, sir, I think you might have misunderstood something. I am only a beggar, no one ordered me to do anything. The boy frantically tried to explain. In just a few seconds, the ice had already reached his knees, and the frozen part below had completely lost feeling. 45 seconds left. Zhang Qing reported the remaining time with a smile that did not seem like a smile. Acting? Sorry. In this world, there were probably not many people whose acting skills could compare to his. In the beginning, in order to survive in this cruel world, it could be said that he had done all kinds of tricks, such as cheating and swindling. He had even done something as unscrupulous as pulling out someone's D***ck. How could a second-rate street artist without professional training deceive an experienced actor who had surpassed the Oscar for Best Actor? Hearing the mocking tone, the boy immediately realized that he had been exposed, and his expression immediately changed. In the end, he did not choose to reveal the mastermind. Instead, he took out a black dagger from his sleeve and threw it forward. However, the moment the sharp blade collided with the skin, the dagger failed to cut through the skin that should have been extremely fragile. Instead, it was as if it had hit a piece of steel. With a clang, the dagger fell to the ground. Ah, a wrong choice. But it doesn't matter. I'm not the one who's going to lose my life. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Qing stood up and walked towards the exit of the Colosseum. The boy who was frozen in place behind him was completely wrapped in white ice. At the same time, in the most luxurious manor located halfway up the mountain of Port Manches, Willie was lying in a hot spring. While enjoying the comfort of the hot water, he was admiring the beautiful girl opposite him. He raised the corner of his mouth and suggested, "My dear Joanna, what do you think of me being your husband?" "You?" Joanna used a piece of silk to gently wipe her chest that was full of fingerprints and teeth marks. She smiled and shook her head. "Don't be wishful thinking. My father will never agree. I believe you know very well that his wish is to marry me to the Western continent and form a stable alliance with the nobles. After all, the situation there has been very stable and trade has been flourishing. But didn't you find out already? Don't think that I don't know. You've always been unwilling to be a tool for a family to form a marriage alliance. You thirst for power, wealth, and strength. I can give all of these to you. As long as you marry me, everything I have will be yours. Don't forget, I'm already 50 years old. For a man, I can live for another 10 years at most. When that time comes, you'll only be in your early 30s. You'll definitely be able to achieve great things. Willie spread out his arms, his tone revealing a strong hint. Ha 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 ha. No, please allow me to refuse. Why do you think I ran away from home? Why did I run away from marriage? Because I'm not willing to be a foil for some man. I am me, the one and only Joanna. No one can ride on my head. Alright, don't think too much. I don't mind maintaining an intimate relationship with you, but you have to do something for me. That's all. With that, the girl stroked her fiery red hair and slowly walked out of the hot spring, allowing the maid to wipe her body. She was wearing a loose, translucent robe on the boat. Just as she was about to return to her room to rest and wait for the good news, a loud noise suddenly came from the front hall of the manor. In the next second, boom. A blinding red light shot up into the sky. It directly blew up the front half of the courtyard filled with all sorts of exotic flowers into the sky. Damn it! What happened? Willie hurriedly jumped out of the hot spring, his eyes emitting a terrifying cold light. One had to know that ever since he established himself on this land, it had been many years since anyone dared to provoke him like this. Master! Master! Not good! There's a powerful metahuman rushing in from outside. Your subordinates are all dead. The white-haired old butler rushed in, his body trembling as he shouted loudly. Shock, fear, trembling. It wasn't hard to tell from his eyes that the intruder was definitely a terrifying enemy. Willie wasn't an idiot. He immediately looked at Joanna. His face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. He suddenly realized that this ambitious woman might have caused him to provoke someone that he shouldn't have. So without saying anything, he rushed up and tried to take her down as a bargaining chip. Scram! Don't come over! Stay away from me! Joanna wasn't someone to be trifled with either. She immediately raised her right hand and condensed an arrow completely made of fire elements, staring at the other party with vigilance. Tell me, what are you hiding from me? Willie gritted his teeth and questioned. Before Joanna could explain, Zhang Qing walked in from the burning main door and replied with a smile. No, you're wrong. She's not hiding anything. In fact, with her stupid intelligence, she can't understand the power that I have. Chapter 968. Sir, I think there might be some misunderstanding between us. Looking at the extent of the destruction of the garden in front of the manor, Willie's hair stood on end. Because he could feel that this was the closest he had been to death in the past 10 years. No matter who the other party was, that unparalleled mysterious power was not something that an ordinary person could contend against. Misunderstanding? Weren't you the one who sent an assassin to assassinate me? Zhang Qing calmly sat down on a chair, sizing up the other party with great interest. It had to be said that as the largest slave owner in the city, Willie did have some skills. Whether it was personal strength or management, he was far more outstanding than others of his kind. Most importantly, although he had never truly studied systematically, he respected knowledge and books very much, and had been sparing no effort to collect and build a library that belonged to him. In comparison, those lords of the highest council who were immersed in internal strife and had all kinds of violent and plundering thoughts in their minds were like primitive barbarians. Willie smiled bitterly and explained, I don't deny that I gave the order, but you have to understand that I am a man. When a man is tempted, he will often do some irrational things. For this, I am willing to compensate. Zhang Qing glanced at Joanna, who was wearing a thin robe not far away, and immediately understood. He smiled and sighed, I understand now. Indeed, when a man is controlled by the desire of his lower body, he will often choose to throw his rationality to the back of his mind. It can't be helped, this is determined by the part of the genes that reproduce. It is reasonable that your willpower is weak in this aspect. Thank you for your understanding. Willie was very cunning and immediately bowed deeply. Yielding to someone who was stronger than him was not a shameful thing, especially when he had climbed up from the bottom of society. He knew very well that the so-called dignity and pride were worthless. Only those who survived would have a chance. Only those who survived would have a future. If he died for the so-called dignity and pride, other than being laughed at by others, he would not gain anything. Understanding? No, I am just stating a fact. It does not mean that I am forgiving you. Zhang Qing laughed and shook his head. Now tell me, what are you going to do with Joanna? I will capture her, throw her into a dirty and smelly slave shed, and let those stinky men rape her repeatedly while she's still alive. I wonder if you're satisfied with this answer? Wiley's eyes flashed with undisguised viciousness, fully demonstrating what it meant to be merciless when it came to pulling out sex. Hearing this, Joanna's face changed and she roared angrily, "You lowly pig! How dare you? My father will." "I'm sorry, my dear, but I'm afraid your father will never find you here. Even if he finds you, he won't admit that you're the daughter of the Rester family." Might cracked his signature smile. In the next second, a seemingly harmless female slave suddenly swung the clay pot in her hand at lightning speed from behind and smashed it on Joanna's head. Bang! As expected, she fell straight to the ground and fainted. At the same time, a group of fully armed slave warriors went straight to the place where the Sea Snake's crew was resting and started a tragic massacre. Not a single person escaped alive. Needless to say, this was to silence Joanna and completely erase all traces of her visit to the manor. Apart from that, the pirates on the ships docked at the port would probably not be able to escape. Before law and order were fully established, violence was the biggest factor that determined the ownership of this world. As long as there was enough military support, even if more than half of the Earth's population was slaughtered, no one would dare to stand up and resist. In the ancient history of mankind, the Mongols had successfully done it once. Later on, there were even people who called the executioner Temujin, who often treated slaughter as a game, a genius of his generation, and constantly glorified him in various movies and television work. From this, it could be seen that good and evil, morality and law were all bullshit. At least in the face of powerful violence, they were as fragile as newborn babies. About half an hour later, the pitiful girl was placed in front of hundreds of slaves who were being trained. Following the instructor's command, these young and strong men pounced on her as if they had gone mad, putting on a tragic scene. Pain. Despair. She couldn't even commit suicide. Relying on the strong endurance of a woman, Joanna managed to endure this horrifying torture for a full 5 hours before she finally breathed her last. During the entire process, Willie kept secretly observing Zhang Cheng's reaction from the corner of his eyes, only to find that the other party's expression didn't change at all, as if he was just enjoying the show. Without a doubt, this kind of calm attitude made his heart tremble in fear. Because from that pair of eyes, one could see coldness and extreme disdain for life. To put it simply, he didn't see people as people at all. One had to know that even as a great slave owner, he could not completely do this. Looking at the slaves who hadn't bathed for who knows how many days, and who were still venting on the cold corpses, Zhang Qing suddenly turned his head and asked, "You're working for the Hermit Order?" "What?" Willie instantly trembled. "The Hermit Order. Don't tell me you've never heard of this organization?" Zhang Qing smiled meaningfully. Obviously, this was an unexpected surprise. Not even in his wildest dreams did he think that he would be able to find clues about the Hermit Order in this guy's memories. After all, reading someone's memories wasn't an easy task. It was like reading a book full of accounts. Even if you read 10 lines at a time, it would still take you a long time to finish reading them all. "Sir, I think it's better for us to talk about compensation." Willie subconsciously licked his lips. His entire body became abnormally tense. "Ahaha, seems like I was right. Tell me what exactly happened between you and the Hermit Order. As long as your answer satisfies me, I'll let you go." Zhang Qing lightly tapped the table with his finger. "The Hermit Order's power is beyond your imagination. If you don't want to die, It's best not to be too curious. Willie's cautious attitude from before was replaced with a hint of threat. Ha, fine, if you don't want to talk about it, I won't force you, let me see for myself. Zhang Qing lightly sighed, then suddenly reached his hand out without any warning, pressed it on Willie's face and began to invade his memories. In just a few seconds, this pitiful guy's entire body was spasming with white foam coming out of his mouth, turning him into a complete idiot. The side effect of forcefully invading the brain was quite severe, especially the more the target resisted, the more severe the damage to the brain would be. Chapter 969. In the evening, a light drizzle continued to fall from the sky, bringing a sense of tranquility to this land of violence and savagery. In this kind of weather, even the most diligent of bandits wouldn't easily venture out, so all the traveling merchants hurriedly made use of their time to travel, even if the muddy road would bring them a lot of unnecessary trouble, even if the rain could cause them to catch a cold or have a fever. After all, after the Great Calamity, humanity had already lost the industrial technology to manufacture antibiotics. Even a slight cold or fever could be fatal. Furthermore, an infected wound was an incurable disease that had a fatality rate of over 70%. However, for Zhang Qing, this light drizzle didn't affect his mood at all. Instead, he felt like he was going on an excursion. Especially since the group he was leading was currently heading towards a small city that used to be in the middle of America. The closer they got to their destination, the more nervous the mercenaries in the group became, ready for battle at the slightest sign of trouble. Sir, from now on, we've entered the city of the old age, you better be careful. There are a lot of monsters here. Quite a few people who went in with the intention of making a fortune never came out alive. A black man wearing leather armor and wielding a sharp spear suddenly reminded him. Monsters? Ha! No, you're wrong. What's truly scary are never monsters, but humans, Zhang Qing replied meaningfully. Quite obviously, by forcefully invading Willie's mind, he had found out the true hiding place of the Hermit Order, which was this city that was abandoned several hundred years ago. At a certain hidden location in the city, there was an air raid shelter built during the Cold War era in the USA. All the children that were bought were sent inside. As for what exactly was going on inside, no one knew, as Willie's rank obviously wasn't enough to touch the core secrets of the Hermit Order. There was no need to ask to know that the so-called monsters in the city were all the work of the Hermit Order. They didn't want anyone to come close, so they fabricated such rumors to prevent more people from coming in. After all, things from before the Great Calamity were nothing short of miraculous for the current extremely backward level of productivity. Among them, perfectly preserved firearms were worth quite a bit, not to mention the large amount of gold and jewels that remained. Generally speaking, every time a city was discovered that had not been plundered, countless greedy people would be transported there without exception. But the Hermit Order relied on their ruthless nature to forcefully suppress their greed. If it weren't for Zhang Qing paying such a high price, these mercenaries wouldn't have risked their lives to approach this place. That's right. He was the real monster. Look at this world. It is said that it was because humans were too arrogant in the past that they angered the supreme god. As a result, a terrible disaster befell them, and everything they created was destroyed overnight. Another young man, who was obviously Latino and had a wheat-colored complexion, chimed in excitedly. Hey, don't spread your ridiculous arguments in front of the employer. There was no god in this world. All the gods are lies made up by someone on purpose. The only female member of the team curled her lips in disdain. Don't insult my faith. Gods were real. Otherwise, how can you explain how the ancient people created so many great miracles, only for them to collapse and perish overnight? According to the oldest records, countless gigantic stars fell from the sky, causing the earth to crumble and the sea to surge with waves of thousands to tens of thousands of meters. The young man retorted with an indignant expression. Just as the woman was about to say something, a gigantic black shadow suddenly leapt out from the forest. Roar! In an instant, a monster that was twice the size of an elephant and covered in green scales appeared out of thin air. Before anyone could react, it snapped the young man in half at the waist with a bone-chilling snapping sound. Damn it! It's the scaled dragon. Everyone, prepare for battle. Disperse. Disperse. Do not fight it head-on. Prepare the flame powder. Following a series of heart-wrenching roars, the mercenaries quickly got into formation and clashed with the gigantic beast. None of them noticed that their employer had already left without a sound, completely ignoring their lives. Following the footsteps of the monster on the muddy ground, Zhang Qing quickly found the legendary air raid shelter. As he expected, not only were there more than a dozen monsters resting at the entrance of the cave, but there were also people feeding them food, while the smaller ones were being trained by the breeder. I caught your tail. Seeing this scene, Zhang Qing slightly raised the corner of his mouth. His whole body suddenly became transparent and finally disappeared into the air. As a powerful spellcaster, deceiving the eyes of mortals and beasts was a piece of cake for him. After entering the air raid shelter, he was surprised to find that in every small cave, a video was constantly playing. The abducted children were staring intently at the large LCD screen hanging on the wall. Their eyes were filled with fanatical worship, and from time to time, they would shout out words of praise. Brainwashing. This was the first word that popped up in Zhang Qing's mind. There was actually a guy who was using the technology before the disaster to cultivate a large number of devout and fanatical believers. Could it be that God, who had been sleeping for thousands of years, could quickly understand the role of technology in a short time and apply it to his own belief system? In particular, the content played on the LCD screen did not mention a specific name from beginning to end. It only repeatedly emphasized that God was the only true God in the world, the master of the supreme thunder. If it were an ordinary person, it was likely that they would associate it with the famous third-generation god Zeus in ancient Greek mythology. However, Zhang Qing felt that this was definitely not the work of the Olympian god. This was because the bloodline of the Olympian gods originated from the legendary Titan god. They controlled a part of the original power of the world, and did not need the faith of mortals at all. On the contrary, these guys regarded mortals as chess pieces and playthings. If they really woke up, they would not hesitate to show their greatness and then provoke a war between mortals in the name of God for fun. There was no doubt that this air raid shelter belonged to a god who relied on the faith and worship of mortals to obtain power. Moreover, the other party was extremely careful. From the beginning, he had adopted a method of isolation from the outside world to ensure that his spreading of faith would not cause even the slightest commotion and attention. What was more frightening was that this god did not even fully believe in his believers and was not even willing to tell them his real name. Chapter 970. How can I find this god who is secretly playing tricks? Looking at the thousands of children who had been completely brainwashed, Zhang Qing touched his chin and fell into deep thought. Obviously, directly reading their memories was undoubtedly the stupidest idea. Not to mention how much time and effort it would take to do so, whether he could find the answer was a big question mark. Because according to the other party's level of caution, he should not make such a low-level mistake. Just as he stayed invisible and thought about what to do next, a very familiar figure suddenly appeared at the other end of the air raid shelter. Intruder! Report your name! The man covered in a black robe roared loudly. His voice was so loud and full of power that just a few syllables made the whole cave tremble slightly. You are Lafern? Zhang Cheng's eyes instantly saw through the disguise and saw the other party's true face. Lafern was undoubtedly very shocked that someone actually called out the name he had abandoned for hundreds of years. He took off his hood and revealed an extremely majestic face. Especially his two eyes, which were constantly flashing with silver lightning. Needless to say, he had successfully refined his own divinity and officially got rid of the shackles of mortals, becoming a god of thunder who relied on faith to obtain power. It's really you. Long time no see, my dear old friend. Zhang Qing also removed the invisibility spell and opened his arms with a smile on his face. It had to be said that after wandering in the Earth's orbit for so long, now that he saw an old acquaintance, he actually felt a little gratified. As for how Lafren obtained enough divinity and divine power, he did not care at all. Anyway, no matter how the other party developed his believers, he would never be able to surpass those ancient gods born from the primordial world, let alone pose a threat to a powerful and almost invincible Titan. But unfortunately, Lafren did not know this. He looked up and down at Zhang Qing with a look of disbelief. After a full minute, he said, "Unbelievable! I knew you must not be dead. But I didn't expect that you have also obtained power that is not inferior to the gods. Tell me, what is going on with your body and soul? Why do you give me a strong sense of oppression?" "Titan. I'm already a Titan now," Zhang Qing explained straightforwardly. For Lafren, who had just become a new god, there was no need for him to be sneaky or hide anything. Because as long as he wanted to, he could use a finger to crush the other party like a bug at any time. Titan? The Titan of ancient Greek mythology? Lafren's face was filled with shock. Zhang Qing smiled and shook his head. "No, it's another kind of Titan. To put it simply, my existence is equivalent to the energy of a planet. Do you still remember the terrible disaster that destroyed human civilization hundreds of years ago? I did it. Those monsters and invaders from the other world were also my doing." "What? It's you." Lafren's pupils suddenly shrank, and a shocking silver lightning snake was released from his body. As one of the few people who still had intact memories of the past, he knew all too well how the asteroids that fell from the sky caused terrible damage to the planet and human civilization. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as extinction. Due to the violent impact of the asteroids, at least 2/3 of the life on Earth disappeared, and the terrain and landscape were permanently changed. As a typical conspiracy theorist, he had always thought that this should be a super magic released by the demons of hell to invade Earth, but now the truth was finally revealed. That's right. Don't you think that humans were too arrogant in the past? They had no fear at all. They were completely driven by endless instincts and desires. Look at them now, they have learned what fear is. Most importantly, I reshaped the entire world according to my ideas, and permanently integrated magic and supernatural power into human genes. Maybe hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, but one day these primitive and backward mortals will slowly build a brilliant and great mixed civilization. Zhang Qing grinned, revealing a devilish smile. That's right, a devilish smile. He did not have the slightest bit of sympathy or pity for those who had died in the disaster. The reason was very simple. He had completely abandoned his human identity, and no longer thought that the ordinary people who struggled to survive were his own kind. On the contrary, in Zhang Cheng's eyes, humans had long become something very similar to ants in the eyes of humans. Even if he killed hundreds of millions of them, he would not feel any guilt or regret. "You're a lunatic. The craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. The most sick lunatic. Do you know what you've done?" Lafren's hands were shaking uncontrollably, not knowing whether it was because of anger or something else. "Ha ha ha ha. No, my friend, it's not me who's crazy, it's the world. Maybe you won't believe it, but I was just an ordinary person who couldn't be more ordinary, living a boring life every day. But suddenly, one day, my life changed. It became dangerous and full of intrigue and deceit. In order to survive, I lied, cheated, killed, destroyed, and destroyed. I've done the most despicable things you can think of, almost without exception. So, many people, including you, are responsible for my current situation." Zhang Qing laughed unscrupulously and retorted mercilessly. The environment determined one's character, and character determined one's fate. This sentence was not said casually, but had a real impact on a person. You mean, we made you who you are now? Lafren narrowed his eyes, and there was a trace of sarcasm in his tone. Don't joke. From the first time we met, I could feel the vigorous ambition and desire in your heart. It was not others who made you crazy, but yourself. Well, I don't want to argue with you endlessly on this meaningless issue. Because the fact has happened, no matter what we do, it can't be changed. Why don't we change the topic, and talk about how you became a god? And what about Faust, who has always been with you? Don't tell me he's dead. If he, the spokesman of death, also died, that would be too interesting. Faust found a kingdom of the god of death, and is waging a long war, intending to conquer it and become a real god of death. Wow! It seems that when I was away you two really did a lot of things. Chapter 971. Some people said that reuniting with an old friend was something worth celebrating, but for Zhang Qing and Lafren, it was the opposite. They were full of suspicion, tension, and hostility. Especially for Lafren, he always thought that Roland was an extremely crazy, dangerous, and ambitious guy. Zhang Qing, on the other hand, thought that other than himself, everyone else was an NPC. They lived and died for him. Even the whole world was just a game. Those seemingly powerful enemies were like bosses in the game, destined to be the experience points of the legendary protagonist. In fact, he was already tired of the game, so he couldn't wait to end it all. Unfortunately, strength was not everything in this game. To be precise, the problem he urgently needed to solve now was more like solving a puzzle than crushing the enemy with great strength. After all, he couldn't just destroy the Earth and wander aimlessly in the vast universe. After a long silence, Lafren finally opened his mouth and probed. You didn't come here just to look for me, did you? Find you? No, you think too highly of yourself. Zhang Qing chuckled and shook his head. Gods like you, who have been contaminated by the beliefs of mortals, are destined to never reach the peak of power from the beginning. What I'm looking for are the ancient gods who obtained power from the planet itself. You're looking for the ancient gods? Lafren widened his eyes in surprise. That's right. I believe that you, who have the blood of the descendants of gods, should know best that many ancient gods didn't really die. They were just forced to fall into a deep sleep for thousands of years. They only need an opportunity to wake up and appear in front of the world again. How about it? Are you interested in digging them out with me one by one? Zhang Qing made a meaningful invitation. Lafren's eyes kept flashing, as if he was thinking about the risks and benefits. Soon, he smiled and asked, What can I get from it? A lot. To be precise, except for some important information, everything else is yours. Zhang Qing directly gave him an offer that he couldn't refuse. Deal. Lafren agreed without any hesitation. He didn't even ask how he could fulfill his promise. The reason was extremely simple. He'd already sensed that this once weak young man before him had already grown to an extent that far exceeded his imagination, and there was utterly no need to lie or deceive him. You made a wise choice. Believe me, in the future, you will be grateful for the decision you made today. Here, this is a magic communication device. If you have any news, write it down and burn it. Lastly, I'm glad to see that you're still alive. If it's Fong Bin's lake, please send my regards to Faust. Goodbye, dear old friend. As the last word left his mouth, Zhang Qing turned around and disappeared at the end of the dark bomb shelter. Looking at his receding figure, Lafren touched his chin and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, Looking for an ancient god that has fallen into a deep slumber? Looks like he's planning something. I need to inform Faust. After figuring out the master of the Hermit Order, Zhang Qing once again lost all clues and goals. He began to wander aimlessly around the world as a traveler, searching for organizations that he thought were suspicious. But in the end, without exception, none of them had anything to do with the ancient gods. Most of them were schemers and ambitious people. Just as he was wondering if it was a mistake to summon the asteroid to destroy the Order, Adam sent him a trident forged from an unknown metal and divine power. Don't tell me this is the weapon of the legendary Emperor Poseidon? Zhang Qing asked as he held the trident in his hand, feeling the immense power contained within. Without a doubt, this was a divine weapon. The person who held it could control seawater and easily destroy any coastal city or village. Yes, master. Not only is it the weapon of Poseidon, it is also the key to opening one of the seals. And this seal is at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It is also the remains of the destruction of ancient Atlantis. Adam replied calmly. So my next stop is the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean? Zhang Cheng's mouth twitched. It was only at this moment that he understood the true meaning of the phrase, the evils of heaven can be forgiven, but the evils brought on by oneself are the hardest to bear. Due to the door of darkness, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Indian Ocean's deep waters were currently filled with terrifying beasts that were over 100 meters long, making them a forbidden zone for humans. Although these beasts couldn't pose too much of a threat to the Titans, they could greatly reduce the efficiency of the exploration. Originally, it would only take a few days, but now it would take at least a few months to a year or two. Master, this is the sea region where I have analyzed the ancient Atlantis civilization based on the information I have gathered. You can use it as a reference. Adam took out the prepared information and placed it on the table. As an artificial life form, he looked no different from when he was just born. He was still as young and focused as ever, but there was a hint of vicissitudes in his eyes. All right, I understand. Continue to look for the key to open the seal. Open one more and those sleeping gods will awaken. By then, I'll be able to figure out what happened billions of years ago. After saying that, Zhang Qing took the trident and jumped down from the cliff. With a splash, he plunged into the cold seawater and shuttled through the bottom of the sea at an extremely fast speed. For an entire week, he traversed the Arctic region and finally entered the Atlantic Ocean. He began to look for the legendary Atlantis ruins that had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Of course, it wasn't easy, especially under the harassment of the sea beasts from the foreign world. Any slight mistake would cause him to deviate from his original position. Coupled with the scarcity of fish and sea creatures at the bottom of the sea, he couldn't use the fish to explore the surrounding area in a large area. Therefore, he didn't find anything even after searching for 2 to 3 months. Moreover, the legend of Atlantis could be traced back to thousands of years ago. A large amount of silt and sediment had long covered the original appearance of the city. However, as the saying went, hard work pays off. In the 4th month, Zhang Qing finally discovered a pyramid-shaped building about 150 kilometers away from a small island. However, like most ancient ruins, its main body had been completely buried under the silt. Moreover, there were large amounts of rusty bronze and pottery jars around it. Interesting. Looks like this is the Atlantis in Plato's records, the legendary city blessed by the Sea Emperor Poseidon. The corners of Zhang Cheng's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a delighted smile. Chapter 972. First, I need to let this city see the light of day again. Most of the time, Zhang Qing did not mind using some unconventional methods. So after confirming that this was probably the place he was looking for, he directly cast a powerful spell and directly tore apart the Earth's crust within a radius of thousands of kilometers, causing the seabed to rise directly above sea level. As for whether this method would cause a terrifying tsunami, or if the sea level would rise substantially and directly drown a large number of rocky cities and villages, that was not a problem he was concerned about. Immediately after, he summoned tens of thousands of elemental life forms made entirely of silt and gravel, responsible for cleaning up and absorbing the filth that covered the buildings and street. The whole process lasted 3 to 4 days. Finally, a city full of exotic scenery finally appeared in front of him. Huge temples, amphitheaters, arenas, public bathrooms, military camps, statues, stone pillars, reliefs and murals, everything was so dreamy, as if he had returned to the distant era of ancient Greek mythology overnight. In particular, the statue of Poseidon, the Emperor of the Sea, was in the middle of the city. It was lifelike, and the two sapphires inlaid in its eyes shone with a breathtaking brilliance. But what was interesting was that the hand of the statue was empty, and it was not holding the iconic trident of Poseidon. In an instant, Zhang Qing seemed to have realized something, and stepped in front of the statue, and inserted the trident into the right hand of the Emperor of the Sea. Boom. There was a loud noise. The ground that was originally paved with strips of stone suddenly split open, and then slowly separated from the middle, revealing a tunnel that led deeper underground. Looks like this is the seal. I just don't know what kind of monster is waiting for me inside. Zhang Qing shrugged his shoulders and casually walked down the stairs. Soon, he saw a huge monster entrenched in the pool. Although the light was very dim, he could still see the appearance of the other party clearly. It was a sea monster with countless sea dragon heads, and only one of them retained the face of a woman, and an unbelievable amount of divinity flowed in its body. There was no doubt that this was a freak born from the union of two gods. If he guessed correctly, her name should be Charybdis, the daughter of the sea king Poseidon and the earth goddess Gaia, and one of the enemies that caused trouble for the hero Hercules in the epic Odyssey. However, perhaps because she had stayed in the seal for too long, her body and spirit had obviously entered a dormant period, and she did not realize that someone had broken in and was still sleeping soundly. Thousands of years did not make her weak at all. Instead, she had accumulated an astonishing amount of power. Good evening, madam. Zhang Qing obviously did not intend to take the opportunity to sneak attack, and took the initiative to greet her. But it was a pity that Charybdis didn't show any signs of waking up and continued to lay on the ground. Seeing that the other party was unwilling to pay any attention to him, Zhang Qing did not force the issue and headed straight for the seal. But at the moment he brushed past the monster's huge body, Charybdis suddenly opened its eyes, opened its bloody mouth and pounced forward. Boom. 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 Relying on her unparalleled size advantage, in a short moment, she broke at least 7 or 8 stone pillars, and smashed several big holes in the wall. Hee, you are really as sinister and cunning as the rumors say. Zhang Qing easily dodged the impact of the dragon head and laughed sarcastically. Obviously, this monster with divinity flowing in her body had been awake from the beginning, and deliberately pretended to be asleep, waiting for an opportunity to launch a fatal blow. Who are you? Charybdis was undoubtedly not an irrational beast, and she narrowed her eyes and questioned loudly. No matter what, she was the child of the sea king Poseidon and the earth goddess Gaia. Poseidon was the 3rd generation of the main god of Olympus, and Gaia was one of the first gods. Sorry, I am in a hurry today, and I am not interested in talking too much nonsense with you. But out of respect for the lady, I have decided to give you a choice: submit or die. Zhang Qing straightforwardly gave an ultimatum. To be honest, if it was Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, or Athena, he would not mind spending some time to talk to them and see if he could get some useful information. But what was Charybdis? The Olympian gods did not even recognize her as a god, and only regarded her as a banshee with the bloodline of the gods. The god King Zeus did not even have to use any effort to imprison her here like a watchdog for thousands of years. Who do you think you are? Go to hell. Charybdis was obviously enraged, and countless dragon heads opened their bloody mouths and spat out high-pressure water pillars, instantly swallowing everything around them. What was even more terrifying was that the water formed vortexes of various sizes at an extremely fast speed, constantly squeezing and colliding. Even the rocks could not hold on for more than a few seconds, and they would explode into countless smaller particles. As for flesh and blood, they would probably be torn into minced meat in an instant. But this kind of attack was not even an itch for Zhang Qing. In order to deal with the huge monster, He directly transformed into a titan that was over 100 meters tall, smashed the terrifying magic vortex with a slap, and picked Charybdis up like a chicken, and teased with a playful expression, "Lady, it seems that you have made the wrong choice. In that case, let me send you on your way. Maybe in the not-too-distant future, we can meet again in the kingdom of the underworld King Hades." "No!" Accompanied by heart-wrenching screams and roars, Charybdis was directly stomped into a meat patty. The divine power and divinity contained in her body were not wasted, and they were all collected for a rainy day. With the guardian dead, it was naturally not difficult to break the seal. However, the instant the seal broke, Zhang Qing clearly sensed a strong power filling up the entire planet. It was as if something was awakening. The Creator? I see. A disdainful smile appeared on his face, and he turned to leave the city that had been buried at the bottom of the sea for many years. After he was completely gone, the land that rose from the bottom of the sea began to sink again, and finally disappeared forever. Maybe one day in the future, when human civilization developed to a certain extent, they would discover this ancient city and launch a series of archaeological investigations and research. But now it was just a fragment forgotten by history, and it had no meaning at all. Chapter 973. In the endless void, the woman who called herself the Creator was sitting in front of a stone table. She stared at the man who looked very similar to Zhang Qing with her starry eyes. After a full minute, she sighed and said, "It's been 2,000,000 years. Ever since you left me on this desolate planet, you seem to have disappeared. Now you're finally willing to show yourself. 2,000,000 years isn't long for people like you and me, is it? Moreover, I'm not here for you. I'm here for someone else. The organization is in urgent need of a master in energy and mysticism. Therefore, after discussion and voting, we've always thought that it's time to end this trial and accept him as one of us." The man gently touched the mysterious mecha on his body. His tone was full of anticipation. How do you know he can defeat me?" the Creator asked with a cold smile. The man smiled and shrugged. "It's simple. You should know that he's essentially the same as us. You can even say that he's a clone in a parallel universe. Moreover, in the 200 trials, the final winner has always been us. Moreover, do you think that you, who took half of the astral souls, can compare to him, who took 2 astral souls? Don't be naive. You're just a chess piece used to catalyze his growth and surpass himself. You plan to sacrifice me." The Creator clenched her fists tightly and asked with gritted teeth. "No, not sacrifice. I'm embracing fate. My dear, you should feel honored. Because of you, we've obtained a lunatic who completely embraces darkness and has no moral bottom line. In return, I'll let him wipe out all the consciousness in your soul after he kills you. Then, he'll banish you to a foreign world and start anew. Don't worry, we won't kill you." After saying this meaningful sentence, the man stood up. The dazzling engine on the mecha instantly transcended time, space, and distance, easily breaking free of the endless void. The woman who called herself the Creator saw this scene and clenched her fists tightly. She muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "You want my life? Not so easy. You don't understand how much preparation I've done in the past 2,000,000 years. If the situation really reaches that stage, I won't hesitate to detonate the entire planet, or even the entire galaxy, to ruin your plan. No one can ignore me. You can't treat me as a tool that you can discard after using me." At the same time, Zhang Qing, who had just returned to the western continent of North America from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, was surprised to find that 2 moving light spots suddenly appeared on the ancient parchment that had been following him. After experimenting for a while, he recognized that one of the light spots was him, and the other one was moving towards him at an extremely fast speed. Before he could react to what had happened, he saw a ray of blue light streaking across the sky. Then, with a loud boom, it crashed into the ground, creating a 20-meter deep crater. Boom! Gravel and mud flew in all directions. When the smoke dissipated, a man who looked 90% similar to himself, wearing a pure black mecha, slowly walked out from inside. His face was brimming with a warm smile as he gently waved his hand. "Yo! Who are you?" Zhang Qing narrowed his eyes and subconsciously raised his vigilance to the highest level. This was because he could clearly feel that there was a terrifying energy source hidden inside the seemingly gorgeous mecha. It was not much worse than his own Titan. In fact, it might even be stronger. Of course, the most important thing was the indescribable sense of familiarity between the two of them. It was like looking at a reflection in a mirror. "Ha ha ha ha. You've already felt it, haven't you?" The man laughed and opened his arms. "That's right. I am you and you are me. We are different projections of the same consciousness in countless parallel spaces. You can also understand it as another version of yourself in a parallel universe. So, you were the one who brought this thing to hell back then?" Zhang Qing took out the black metal ball he had obtained from Satan's tomb from his pocket. "Yes. The full name of this thing is the High-Energy Antimatter Obliterator. It can instantly decompose all matter into the most primitive particle state through biological energy. How is it? Are you satisfied with its power?" The man raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a hint of pride. Zhang Qing shook his head lightly. "I don't know. To be exact, I've never used it before. Also, can I trouble you to explain to me what exactly is going on with everything I've experienced? Please don't tell me that you're not the mastermind behind all this." "Ah, I don't deny this point. In fact, I'm here this time to talk to you about the organization and the trial." The man had no intention of avoiding the topic, and openly admitted it. "Since that's the case, let's find a place to sit down, have a drink, and talk." After saying that, Zhang Qing took the initiative to lead the way to the nearest town. The man who looked very similar to him followed closely behind. Not long after, the two of them walked into a small, shabby tavern that was still open for business. With the ability to invade minds and control minds, Zhang Qing easily chased everyone out, including the owner. He opened a wooden wine barrel and slowly poured 2 glasses for himself and the other party. Neither of them had the intention to speak first. They both raised their glasses to greet each other, then raised their heads and downed the wine in one gulp, allowing the sour and sweet taste of the wine to stimulate their taste buds. About 2 to 3 minutes later, the man took the initiative to introduce himself. "My name is Chinlu. You can also call me Old Chin. In fact, I'm the same as you. I've already achieved a certain level of immortality. The only difference is that you're using mysticism, while I'm using technology. Just like the saying goes, whether it's technology or magic, once developed to a certain level, there's not much of a difference in essence. I understand that you must have a lot of questions in your heart. Take this opportunity to ask. I'm willing to answer them in detail. First of all, what's with the organization you mentioned just now? Secondly, why did we choose me? Lastly, and most importantly, what's your goal?" Zhang Qing pondered for a moment and immediately raised the 3 questions he was most concerned about. Obviously, judging from the other party's attitude, what he had experienced could be classified as a trial. In other words, this unbelievably powerful organization used a series of methods to select the appropriate talents to expand itself. Chapter 974. The organization, as the name suggests, is an organization formed by countless like-minded people. You might not believe it, but until now, the organization has conducted more than 200 trials. Without exception, the final winner has always been us. Simply put, from the founder to the next member, they are all our clones in the various parallel universes. How is it? Unbelievable, isn't it? The guy who called himself Old Chin cracked a playful smile. Zhang Qing raised his eyebrows in disbelief. "You mean, in the entire organization, more than 200 members all look very similar to you and me, or even exactly the same?" "Yes. Do you know how crazy that is? Many times, if I don't use the assistance system, I can't even tell who is who. Old Chen shook his head with emotion. But the good thing is that we have a strong sense of identity with each other. At the same time, we are also incomparably united. When necessary, we are willing to sacrifice for each other. After all, we have a closer connection with each other than bloodline. Then what's the trial about? Zhang Qing frowned and continued to ask. The trial, as the name suggests, is a way to recruit qualified members. Simply put, we will artificially interfere with the progress of Earth in a certain parallel universe, causing it to deviate from its original history and create an environment of a certain time. For example, when I was undergoing the trial, the Earth I was in was a highly technologically advanced world. Not only did humans become the overlords of the Milky Way, they also launched a war and invaded the nearby Andromeda galaxy. Because the organization needed to build a powerful space fleet, I successfully passed the trial and joined the organization as a member. Now, the organization needs a master of energy and mysticism, so you were chosen. Old Chen answered as he scooped up a large cup of red liquid from the wine barrel and continued to gulp it down. He did not mind that the brewing technology was extremely primitive and backward, causing the wine to taste very sour and astringent. I see. Zhang Qing nodded thoughtfully. No wonder I kept feeling that something was wrong. Turns out that you guys have modified this planet. It's not just modification. We have turned this planet into your food. As you continue to devour, you will become stronger and stronger. In the end, you will reach or even exceed our expectations. As for the last question, the highest goal of the entire organization, I can't give you an answer for the time being. Even though I personally feel that you won't have much of a problem defeating that woman. But no matter what, rules are rules. As long as you don't pass the final test, I can't tell you the organization's goal. Believe me, you'll be shocked when you hear it. When Senior Chen said this, his eyes were filled with excitement and fanaticism, like a lunatic who was not in his right mind. Of course, to Zhang Qing, this kind of gaze was not unfamiliar to him, because sometimes he would also become like this, so he rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. Judging from the other party's strange mech, which had advanced technology to the extreme and was not much worse than the Titan, he could more or less determine how terrifying the strength of the so-called organization was. Not to mention, there was also a founder who had been popular for who knew how many years. In the universe where Azeroth was located, there were only a few Titans added together. Among them, Azeroth's astral soul was known as the one with the most potential. But the organization had more than 200 individuals who were comparable to Zhang Qing, or even stronger than him. This amazing strength was probably enough to conquer the entire universe. What did they want to do? Why were they still tirelessly recruiting new people when they were so powerful? The more he thought about it, the more Zhang Qing felt that the organization's goal must be far beyond the scope of his understanding. However, he was not in a hurry to get an answer. He crossed his hands and supported his chin. His eyes were empty and deep. When Senior Chen saw this, he smiled and comforted him. Relax, there's no need to be so nervous. I believe that with the knowledge and power you have, it should be more than enough to deal with her. After all, a long, long time ago, she was betrayed by the god she created. Not only was her power sealed, but her consciousness was also expelled into the distorted void. She never had the chance to go further. No, I think you've misunderstood the god. I'm not worried about that woman who calls herself the creator. Instead, I'm worried about how to quickly undo all of the seals, release her, and then completely destroy her, Zhang Qing explained with a helpless expression. Sorry, I'm afraid I can't help you with this. Because the organization has strict rules, before you officially pass the trial, I can't interfere in any way, let alone give you the slightest bit of help. Fortunately, for us, time has never been a problem. It may be decades or centuries. In short, we'll patiently wait for you to complete the trial. Well, today's conversation ends here. I still have a lot of things to deal with. You can slowly enjoy the last of your leisurely life. Once you become a member of the organization, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to enjoy the beautiful holidays anymore. As soon as he finished speaking, Old Chun stood up and walked out of the tavern. Immediately after, he soared into the air and broke through the atmosphere at a speed that was difficult to be seen with the naked eye. He drew a dazzling white trajectory in the outer sky, and then directly broke the bindings of time and space. He entered a passage that looked like a wormhole and finally disappeared without a trace. Zhang Qing raised his head and stared at the singularity that was rapidly returning to its original state. His eyes revealed a fiery glow as he muttered to himself, "Incredible! You can actually use the means of technology to exceed the speed of light by thousands of times in a short period of time. With pure speed and kinetic energy, you can enter the distorted space and time." As a Titan who had outstanding achievements in the fields of energy, magic, alchemy, mysticism, and so on, he was still unable to make himself move faster than the speed of light. From this, it could be seen how difficult it was, not to mention the technological means. According to Einstein's point of view in the special theory of relativity, it was impossible for matter in the world or even the universe to exceed the speed of light. This was because once the speed of light was exceeded, it would theoretically form a terrifying black hole, producing an infinite gravitational force that would firmly attract all the materials around it. Although an Italian physicist later claimed to have discovered a type of superluminal neutrino in another experiment, it was later confirmed that it was just an erroneous data. This also meant that until now, in the technology that Zhang Qing understood, there was no civilization that could prove that there was matter that could move faster than the speed of light. But now, this common sense had been broken by a man wearing a black power mech who looked 90% similar to himself. Chapter 975. Horizons were a decisive factor in a person's mindset and way of thinking. It was just like how modern people looked at ancient people. The former might not necessarily be smarter than the latter in terms of intelligence, but they had the opportunity to come into contact with and learn more knowledge, broadening their horizons. Naturally, there would be a huge gap between them, as well as an inexplicable sense of superiority in their hearts. There was no doubt that Old Chen's appearance had once again broadened Zhang Cheng's horizons, making him realize that the Titans were not the pinnacle of the evolutionary level of an individual life form. On the contrary, this was just the beginning, a starting point. Other than that, the universe might be more profound and complex than the parts he currently knew. Even time and space were only an extremely small part of the entire universe. According to the speculation put forward by some scientists, the universe was likely to be far beyond 3 dimensions, but a complex quantized space as high as 11 dimensions. Of course, the space where humans lived was still in the 3-dimensional universe, so most of it could not be observed. It was just like the dark matter that had always been hotly discussed by physicists but had never been truly observed. As a master of magic, energy, alchemy, and occultism, he could understand the vast, mysterious, and almost boundless space of the universe more deeply than most mortals. In this vast space, infinite possibilities were bred. The content that human technology could observe and understand was not even a billionth of it. The so-called gravity, gravitation, strong interaction, theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, and other seemingly profound theories were just a drop in the ocean displayed by the universe. Whether it was mortals, gods, or special life forms like the Titans that could touch the high-dimensional universe, they could only be regarded as a slightly stronger ant in the face of the universe. After figuring this out, Zhang Qing quickly abandoned his originally leisurely exploration journey and directly began to slaughter tens of millions of living beings without scruples. He once again opened the door of darkness, allowing the Hell Legion to surge into the human world, completely destroying all the people and organizations that dared to resist or obstruct his plans. He kept all the remaining humans in captivity like livestock, brutally brainwashing and transforming them. In the end, like the worker ants and soldier ants in an ant nest, they were used as tools for exploration, constantly exploring places around the world that might contain relics and keys. As the supreme master of this terrifying army, Zhang Qing no longer needed to do everything himself. He sat on the throne that his subordinates had built for him and silently watched through the window at the beautiful girls who were crawling on the ground like ants and reciting poems 24 hours a day. Needless to say, these messy things were all done by the dreadlords who were good at currying favor and sucking up to others, especially the first lord of Nazresm, Barum, who almost had the word treacherous carved on his face. All day long, he tried to please his master. Even though many of the bad-tempered abyssal lords and the intelligent Erita demons were dissatisfied with this, they could only bury their resentment in the depths of their hearts and wait patiently for the other party to fall out of favor before adding insult to injury. It had to be said. The advantage of despotism, tyranny, and cruelty was that it could make the lower class feel fear to the greatest extent. Even if there was any resistance, it would be carefully hidden. I can't believe it. You're actually willing to repeatedly destroy and ravage an originally prosperous and civilized world into what it is now. Valenti sighed slightly and took the initiative to break the silent atmosphere in the hall. Unlike Zhang Qing, he obviously still retained the way of thinking of humans. He was full of sympathy and helplessness for his own kind being oppressed, enslaved, and tortured by the demons. Humph. Stupid idea. Zhang Qing curled his lips in disdain. Don't tell me that if I don't destroy them, they won't destroy themselves? You have the power to see through the past and the future. You should understand that the intelligent life born on this planet isn't just humans. On the contrary, before humans, there were many intelligent species and civilizations. But where did they all go? Without exception, they all walk towards self-destruction in the end, so humans are no exception. Do you know? In your eyes, the seemingly prosperous modern society is actually more fragile than ever. Perhaps a biochemical or nuclear terrorist attack can pull the entire world to the brink of destruction. I just accelerated the process a little bit. Valenti nodded with a bitter smile. Because of this, you're the monster that can surpass everything, and I'm just a slightly timid, weak, and ordinary person who likes to enjoy life. Pardon me for asking, but after everything is over, what are you going to do with me and this terrifying demon army? To be honest, you're just tools to me, just like dogs are to humans. Perhaps the only difference is that I'm colder and more rational than most humans, so I'm not stupid enough to think that dogs are friends of humans. If you were in his shoes, what would you do to a useless tool? Zhang Qing asked meaningfully. I think I would probably abandon them. Valenti seemed to realize something, and a light flashed in his eyes. That's right. So I suggest you start preparing from now on and find a way to leave this planet. Otherwise, I promise that when I leave, those ferocious demons will definitely find a chance to kill you. Zhang Qing raised the corner of his mouth slightly, revealing a chilling smile. Valenti couldn't help but shudder at the thought of those demons staring at him with malicious eyes. He gritted his teeth and said, I want to make a deal with you. What deal? Zhang Qing touched his chin with a half-smile. He knew very well that Valenti was a person with a strong desire to live. He took the phrase, a bad life is better than a good death, as the highest goal in life. He would rather live as long as he could, and even if he couldn't, he would find a way to resurrect in the future. I can provide the key and address of the fourth seal. In return, I hope you can send me to a relatively safe world. Valenti offered without hesitation. You know the key and address of the fourth seal? Why didn't you say so earlier? Zhang Qing's eyes revealed a hint of danger, and the temperature in the air suddenly dropped to freezing point. Although he wasn't considered temperamental for the time being, He would never let go of his subordinates who deliberately deceived him. Sorry, I just remembered it recently. You have to understand that I've been in a state of suspended animation for too long, so the memories in my brain have been damaged to a certain extent. Besides, it's not too late to remember it now, is it? Valenti bowed deeply with a sincere expression. There was no need to ask to know that he was a truly smart person, and he knew how to not cross Zhang Cheng's bottom line. Chapter 976. King's Landing, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms and one of the most important port cities in all of Westeros, had recovered from the war and chaos. A large number of merchants from the north and south once again appeared in the market, as well as nobles who had come from other places to enjoy a luxurious life. Although the nobles of the western region, led by the Lannister family, still relied on Casterly Rock and refused to swear allegiance to Queen Daenerys Targaryen, and the Vale was under the secret control of Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, their attitude was ambiguous. However, other places had already accepted the fact that the Targaryens were once again the rulers of this land. The reason was simple. There was a giant dragon named Clo Kelba that was entrenched in the sky above King's Landing. It was unscrupulous in declaring to the world what true and unparalleled power was. Even arrows made of Valyrian steel could not leave a single scratch on its violet scales. No one knew how to defeat a dragon that could not be injured at all, and no one could understand what it meant to be a divine creature. The only thing they knew was that the original owner of this dragon was called Mason, who had once become the richest ruler of the Riverbend area. Not only did he destroy several ancient nobles who had taken root there for hundreds of years, he was also the only legal husband of the queen. However, for some reason, this man with a very suspicious background actually left quietly after he became famous. Some people believed that he and Daenerys did not get along well, and they parted on bad terms. Some people also believed that he had to disappear from the eyes of the world because he had been raped, to prevent the situation of the royal power being usurped again. However, only one person understood that Mason's departure had nothing to do with all the rumors. He had his own pursuit and goal in life, and that person was the Queen Daenerys Targaryen. Standing at the highest point of the Red Keep, the young queen was looking down at the bustling port of King's Landing. Without turning her head, she asked the Red Viper, Oberyn Martell, who was always following behind her, "The Lannister family still refuses to surrender to me, right?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Oberyn Martell bowed elegantly. Although his private life was very dissolute, he did not dare to have any thoughts about this extraordinarily beautiful woman of noble blood in front of him. Not only him, but almost all the adult males of the great nobles did not dare to have such delusions. The reason was simple. Every time someone approached the queen with some ulterior motive, they were all burned to ashes by the dragon's flames without exception. In the eyes of the mystic dragon, only its master was the queen's only spouse. Then what do you think we should do next? Send an army to completely uproot them? Daenerys subconsciously frowned. Of course. Are we going to let them continue to be kings? This continent only needed one king. The rest would either submit or be destroyed. You have overwhelming power, so why don't you kill one as an example to others? Don't forget, Peter Baelish's of the Vale is valleys of you. He Daenerys of this landing of the crown, of the keep of the Lord of the Keep. Due to their blood feud, House Martell and House Lannister had long since become mortal enemies. If there was anyone who wished to destroy Casterly Rock, it would be him. If the situation permitted, the famous Red Viper wouldn't mind killing everyone with the surname of Lannister, from 70 to 80 years old to newborn babies. In this world where everything depended on one's bloodline and birth, severing one's bloodline was the only way to prevent a resurgence. As for the moral condemnation of being vicious and cruel, it was nothing to the nobles. It wouldn't even affect their reputation. But in today's meeting, some people think that I shouldn't push House Lannister too hard. On the contrary, I should be more lenient and merciful. This way, they will soon choose to surrender and not stubbornly resist. Daenerys' eyes revealed a hesitant look. It was obvious that her childishness had broken out once more. As a young woman who had not received a systematic education and had no experience in governing, her bones were filled with the contradiction between beautiful fantasies and cruel reality. On one hand, she yearned for the respect and love of everyone and didn't want to cause too much slaughter and destruction. On the other hand, she lacked a deep understanding of politics, military affairs, and economic. She couldn't play with power like a truly qualified monarch and firmly control the country in her own hand. In fact, if not for the dragon intimidating all those with bad intentions, the queen would have either been overthrown or reduced to a mere figurehead, or become the plaything of some ambitious people. Your Majesty, a monarch doesn't just have to show mercy. He also has to show a cruel and merciless side. Otherwise, he won't be able to intimidate the nobles who desire to expand their power. Think about it, ever since you ascended the throne, how many merciful things have you done? But what about cruel and merciless things? You've done almost none of them. Trust me, this country needs your cruelty and mercilessness right now. Oberyn continued to exert his influence in an attempt to change the queen's mind. The so-called feudal system was, in essence, a political game between nobles. Every great noble tried to influence the royal family to achieve unspeakable goals, such as attacking their opponent. In their eyes, there was no concept of a country. Their family and fief were the foundation. Most of the time, as long as they could ensure that their territory and wealth didn't suffer, it wasn't a big deal to change their allegiance. All right, I understand. Please give me some time to think about it. Daenerys waved her hand lightly, indicating that he could leave. When the Red Viper was completely gone, she sighed and muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "Mason, my dear husband, if it were you, what would you do?" At the same time, in an inconspicuous alley of King's Landing's flea nest, two incongruously dressed men silently appeared. One of them was Zhang Qing, and the other was, without a doubt, Valenti. Feeling the pairs of vigilant eyes around him, Zhang Qing asked with a half-smile, "How is it? Does this place suit your taste?" It's a world full of medieval sentiments. Poor commoners, extravagant nobles, and wanton women. My first impression is very good. But I need a few days of in-depth observation. After all, for me, this is an important choice that concerns my entire life. Valenti looked around excitedly, seemingly unaware that Westeros was only a part of the world of the Song of Ice and Fire. It didn't represent the average level of supernatural power in this world, and it wasn't as safe as it seemed. Chapter 977. For Valenti, whether or not a world was suitable for him to live in depended on two factors: safety and the openness of men and women. Of course, the safety of the former did not refer to the security of society in the ordinary sense. It referred to the strength of supernatural forces, such as whether or not a terrifying invader would suddenly appear, or a terrifying monster would awaken from its seal. As for the latter, all he had to do was to stroll around the special services, and he would be able to tell. Wasn't this less than 2 hours after arriving in King's Landing? He could not help but visit a famous brothel. The owner was a black woman from the Summer Islands. Her name was Satya. More interestingly, she had a daughter named Alayaya. She also provided all sorts of wonderful services to her customers here. In fact, the long-lost Tyrion the Imp, Oberyn Martell the Red Viper, and Bronn the Red Viper, the once-knighted Sellsword, had all been frequent patrons of the brothel. Robert Baratheon, the man with the green steps on his head, had fathered an illegitimate daughter with one of the whores there. But these were not the most shocking things. The most incredible thing was that there was a secret passage inside the brothel that led to a secluded place. According to what Varys said, this secret tunnel was dug out by a prime minister, and the reason was very funny. He didn't want others to know that he frequented this place, so he dug out a secret tunnel. But Zhang Qing would never tell Valenti about these secrets. He would not even tell him about the otherworldly demons that were gathering in the north and preparing to invade the south. After all, he was not so magnanimous as to pretend that nothing had happened after being threatened. On the contrary, he would wait for an opportunity to take revenge. That was his true style. His patience now was for the sake of getting back 100, or even 1,000 times the interest in the future. Poor Valenti did not understand that his self-righteous cleverness had pushed him into the abyss of despair. He was still enjoying himself in the arms of women, lying in the arms of women and venting his primitive, beast-like desires. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Qing silently went to the island where the red dragon, Kronada, was imprisoned. The Death Knight Shuma had already transformed the island into a burial ground by killing the sailors of the passing ship. Half-rotten zombies could be seen everywhere, as well as groups of wandering skeletons. They were more loyal to their duties than any guards. They did not need to eat, drink, rest, or entertain themselves. They would not feel bored or tired. Just as he stepped onto the beach, a death dragon covered in deathly white scales descended from the sky. It constantly let out threatening growls, and 2 balls of strange cold light flickered in its eye sockets. Needless to say, this was the dragon egg that Zhang Qing had hatched. It was now more than 35 meters and it had a certain degree of intelligence. Before the death dragon could launch a probing attack, the Death Knight Shuma, who was stationed here, finally arrived. He stopped his companion's reckless actions through the mental connection and took the initiative to kneel on one knee, greeting with a low and hoarse voice, "Great Master, your most loyal servant pays his respects to you. How was it? Did the old dragon underground cause any trouble while I was away?" Zhang Qing directly asked the question he was most concerned about. He tried to summon some of his subordinates to attack the island, but in the end, without exception, they all became members of the Death Army. Thanks to his help, I now have 8 necromancers and more than 15,000 zombies and skeletons. As he spoke, Shuma turned around and glanced at the densely packed army of the Death Army kneeling on the ground. With the help of necromancy spells, he had even transformed many ships into ghost ships. They constantly cruised in the surrounding sea and would immediately attack once they discovered a living person. Seeing this scene, the corner of Zhang Cheng's mouth rose, revealing a devilish smile. He nodded in satisfaction. "Well done. Now, I think it's time to give you another more important mission. Here, take this magic sword and go to the north. Tell those stupid deviant ghosts for me. Either submit, or be destroyed. There's no third choice. After subduing the deviant ghosts, kill all life outside the Great Wall of Despair and create a truly invincible army of the undead." "As you wish." Shuma said nothing and directly took the 2-handed sword that exuded a cold aura. He immediately felt a resonance from the depths of his soul. Without asking, he knew that this sword was actually an enhanced replica of the divine artifact, Frostmourne. In the library on the Dreadlord's mother planet, there was even the entire process of making it. It was not difficult to make it at all. As the weakest of the Lich King's 2-piece set, Frostmourne's value could not be compared to the Helm of Command at all. Therefore, Zhang Qing carried out a series of enhancements and combined the abilities of the 2 divine artifacts into one. As early as when he came to the Song of Ice and Fire world, he had already thought about how to carry out his revenge. That was to create an army of the undead and then threaten the human world, forcing them to hand over Valenti. Otherwise, he would launch an all-out war and completely kill all the living. In this way, this unlucky fellow would become the public enemy of the entire human race. No matter where he fled to, he would not be able to live peacefully. Even if he did not die, he would have to spend the rest of his life constantly wandering. Most of the time, killing a person was not the best way to take revenge. Instead, it was a form of relief. Zhang Qing didn't want Warrant to die so easily. He wanted to destroy Warrant's spirit and will. He wanted Warrant to slowly taste the bitter fruit of his own actions in endless pain and regret. He wanted Warrant to pay for his foolish actions. As a portal that spanned across the sea and the Westeros continent slowly opened, Shuma led his subordinates into the snowy wilderness and began a new journey. As an undead, the meaning of his life was to create fear and despair, and he was 100% obedient to his master's orders. In the short span of a month, he and his undead subordinates had plundered dozens of Wastelanders' settlements, rapidly expanding their army to more than 50,000. This was especially true for the resurrected giants, who were simply natural war machines. Most human weapons were helpless against them. However, this had nothing to do with Zhang Qing. Ever since the undead had completely left, he had used his powerful magic to open up a passage, following the direction of the flowing lava underground. Not long after, he arrived in front of the red dragon and teased it with a slightly teasing tone. "Long time no see, my dear Cronata. I wonder if you still remember me? It's you. You actually dare to come back? You've appeared in front of me again." Cronata suddenly opened his eyes from his deep slumber, his entire body emitting an astonishing aura. Chapter 978. Control your emotions. My dear friend, don't force me to use violence. Zhang Qing narrowed his eyes as he warned. However, it was a pity that the impression left from the last time they met, as well as the innate arrogance of giant dragons, caused Cronata to make the wrong judgment. He opened his bloody mouth and roared, "Go to hell! Despicable worm! I'll burn you to ashes!" The next second, boom! A ball of scorching dragon's breath gushed out, directly covering the not-so-spacious underground hall. The terrifying heat caused the surrounding rocks to melt into liquid, constantly bubbling and bubbling. Anger. Uncontrollable anger. Ever since it was fooled by a mere human, its heart had sunk into an extremely humiliating resentment that it could not extricate itself from. It was almost constantly replaying the details of what had happened, and this humiliation quickly turned into uncontrollable anger. Now, this anger finally had a channel to vent. The terrifying breath lasted for an entire minute. When the giant dragon stopped, the surrounding rocks that led to the surface had all melted, forming a huge circular hole. However, Zhang Qing, who had been roasted by the dragon's breath for an entire minute, was unscathed. He still had a faint smile on his face as he casually mocked. "Is this how you welcome an old friend? Or do you think that I'm so stupid that I don't have any confidence in coming back to seek revenge? My dear Cronata, it seems like you're no different from your own kind, always so idiotic and arrogant." "You blocked my breath?" The red dragon was clearly shocked. Its eyes, which looked like flowing lava, revealed a look of disbelief. "Blocked?" Zhang Qing shook his head mockingly. "No, in fact, I didn't do anything. The temperature of the magical flames you spat out was too low, to the point that it couldn't even hurt my skin. You and I are already two completely different life forms. I'm much more advanced than you, and much more powerful. As a return gift for your warm welcome, I'll let you see what true power is." Just as he finished speaking, he raised his left hand and sprayed a ball of bone-piercing cold air into the air. In the blink of an eye, the terrifyingly low temperature quickly spread in all directions. In less than half a minute, everything within a radius of a few hundred meters was frozen. Even the boiling magma instantly solidified into hard rock. Even though the energy contained in the Titan's body was too shocking, making it impossible for him to tear through space and descend directly like before, Zhang Qing could only use the projection of his consciousness, which did not even reach 1% of the strength of his body. However, it was still very easy for him to deal with a mere red dragon. As he felt his body temperature drop and the flame of life flickering in his chest weaken, Cronata finally realized how frightening the power of this terrifying spell was. As he struggled to break free from the frozen lower half of his body, he shouted in panic, "No! You can't do this! Let me go! I can't die! If I die, the dragons in this world will become extinct, and all magic related to dragons and light will disappear. Those silent deviant ghosts in the cold lands of the north will kill all the living people in this world. You don't have to worry about deviant ghosts. I've already sent my most loyal servants to take them in. I believe that it won't be long before a brand new power rises outside the Great Wall of Despair, a huge empire of death. However, they won't destroy the human world so easily. Instead, they'll act as a catalyst for civilization, forcing the nobles who think they're better than the rest to change. As for dragons, my child Kolo Kelbo will inherit your position and become the new dragon king of this world. Zhang Qing used an extremely cruel tone to shatter Kronada's fantasy. Let go of an old enemy? Oh please. There were usually only two kinds of people who would do such a thing. One was foolish enough to believe that repaying evil with good would make the world a better place. The other was a show out of a special need. For example, the founding general of the Han dynasty, Han Xian, forgave the butcher who humiliated him. It wasn't that he was magnanimous, but that he wanted to make use of this opportunity to improve his reputation. Essentially, it was a political show and artificial hype. As a conspiracy theorist, Zhang Qing didn't believe that there was a perfect saint in the world. Perhaps some people would occasionally lend a helping hand to those who needed help out of sympathy, but they definitely wouldn't do it for a lifetime. The more a celebrity was praised, the worse the things he did. He might even be a swindler who betrayed the country in exchange for his own benefit. Looking at the red dragon that was slowly freezing into an ice sculpture, Zhang Qing finally raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pah! Crash! The huge ice sculpture instantly shattered into pieces, falling to the ground and shattering into thousands of pieces. Especially the head that was filled with fear, perfectly preserving Kronada's reaction before his death. Humph! You got lucky. If I wasn't in a hurry, I would slowly let you taste the pain and despair before your death. Next, it's time to visit my dear wife and see if she's still as naive and childish as before, treating governing a country as a child's game. As he spoke, Zhang Qing once again cast a teleportation spell and disappeared from the spot. Just as he left, the small island shook violently, and then with a deafening sound, it sank to the bottom of the sea. At the same time, Valenti, who had just finished a fierce battle with 3 women, was lying on the soft bed, raising his head and gulping down a large glass of wine. He licked his lips and asked one of the fair-skinned young women, "Cute baby, can you tell me what interesting things have happened in the city recently?" "Interesting? I don't know what you're referring to." The naked woman winked playfully. I think these shiny little things should be able to satisfy your greedy appetite, right?" Valenti laughed as he took out a handful of gold coins from his pocket and scattered them into the air. Instantly, the prostitutes who were lying lazily on the bed and chairs all jumped up at the same time, screaming as they fought for the gold. They did not know that gold was the most useless metal in hell. The demons would rather throw it on the side of the road than take a second look at it. Valenti successfully made use of this and unknowingly collected a large amount of gold, ordering the little demon to turn it into currency. There was no need to ask to know that he had been preparing to leave from the beginning. That inconspicuous magic leather bag was filled with 500 tons of gold coins, enough for him to live a luxurious life for the rest of his life. Chapter 979. Your Majesty, you must not be merciful to traitors, especially Lannisters like Lannisters. Especially someone as ambitious as Lannister, who has plotted and participated in many rebellions and even killed the royal bloodline. Blood and death must be used to wash away the sins on their bodies. That's right. I completely agree. The Lannister family must be removed from the list of nobles. Have you forgotten how they treated your parents and siblings in the past? Objection. Although the Lannisters have made many mistakes, they do not deserve death. Don't forget, they have been the guardians of the Western Territory for generations. Once we lose the Lannisters, how can we maintain stability and peace there? Stability and peace in the Western Territory? Don't you know that the Lannisters are now the biggest threat to the kingdom? Idiot! Politics is not child's play. Do you think that by eliminating the Lannisters and destroying Casterly Rock, the Western Territory will obey Her Majesty's rule? Naive. Damn it. Old man. Who are you talking about? Do you want to die? I'm talking about you. What, you still intend to draw your sword at the Imperial Conference? Duel. I want to duel with you. Draw your sword if you are a man. Don't tell me that thing at your waist is just an ornament. Seeing that the Imperial Conference had once again fallen into a state of mutual hostility, Daenerys Targaryen held her forehead, a pained and helpless expression on her young and beautiful face. Obviously, this kind of situation that escalated from quarreling to fighting had long been a daily routine. As she had been forcibly pushed to the throne by external forces, her deterrence to the great nobles was limited. Especially after the other party found out that she was not a cruel and bloodthirsty tyrant, they quickly became bold and formed 3 stable political and military alliances, constantly staging catfight. Simply put, they were taking advantage of the fact that the Queen was young and ignorant of politics, intending to take the opportunity to expand their influence and sphere of influence. Your Majesty, are you not going to stop the lords? A personal maid cautiously reminded. Daenerys glanced at the increasingly chaotic scene and shook her head gently. No need, let them be. Anyway, in their eyes, I'm just a little girl who doesn't know anything. As soon as she finished speaking, she stood up and left the Iron Throne, disappearing at the end of the dark corridor of the castle. Her personal maid and the King's Guard followed closely behind. Ironically, the Queen's departure was not noticed by any of the ministers, including the Prime Minister. They were still quarreling with each other, with 2 of them even raising their fists and punching each other. There was not the slightest bit of etiquette and restraint that nobles should have. It could be said that the current Imperial Council was not so much an organization that assisted the king in handling government affairs as it was a feast to divide up benefit. However, when they could not reach a compromise, they would rather drag each other down than let their competitors take advantage of them. Of course, they did not have much thoughts about Queen Daenerys for the time being. On the one hand, the dragons made everyone wary of attacking the rat for fear of breaking the vases. On the other hand, House Targaryen was left with only a single heir. For the time being, they would not be able to threaten the interests of the nobles. On the contrary, as the Queen did not even have a trusted aide by her side, she could only rely on the great nobles for help. What else could she do? Were they going to let a bunch of illiterate commoners rule a huge country? What a joke! What was the difference between that and suicide? All of Westeros would be plunged into chaos and famine. Even though Daenerys was a little naive, she was no fool. She could feel the barely concealed contempt in the actions of her ministers. There was no doubt that these fellows had never treated her as a true queen. They did not have the slightest bit of respect or fear in their hearts. Puppet. For some reason, this unfamiliar yet familiar word popped up in Daenerys' mind. There was a period of melancholy in her life where she was controlled like a puppet. When she was young, it was her elder brother and the wealthy governor of Pentos, Illyrio Mopatis. When she was older, she was sold to Drogo to be his wife. It was this kind of wandering life that taught her perseverance and patience. Standing on the balcony of the Red Keep, the young queen took a deep breath and released all the anger and indignation she had accumulated. Just as she was about to turn around and announce the end of the day's Imperial Council, she suddenly realized that the knights and maidservants in charge of her safety had fallen asleep on the ground for some reason. The next second, suddenly, a black figure slowly walked out of the darkness and greeted her with a smile. "Good morning, storm-born Daenerys. How have you been recently?" It's you. When did you return to King's Landing?" Daenerys' eyes revealed a trace of undisguised joy and she immediately rushed forward to give him a warm hug. I've only been back for less than 14 hours. How does it feel to be a queen? Ruling a country full of contradictions isn't as easy as you think, Zhang Qing teased with a half-smile. When he walked in from the main entrance, he had already seen the chaotic scene of the Imperial Council. He understood that this woman, who had never received the appropriate education, would not be able to fight against those cunning old foxes. You saw it all? Daenerys raised an eyebrow slightly. Zhang Qing shrugged and replied, That's right. I have to say, you really are a failure as a queen. You clearly have the greatest trump card, but you don't know how to use it. A group of hyenas actually snatched away the power that originally belonged to you. To be honest, I'm starting to regret pushing you onto the Iron Throne. Trump card? What trump card? Daenerys subconsciously widened her eyes, quickly thinking in her mind about what other tricks she had not used. It's very simple. Your trump card is the dragon. Bring Colo Kelba to Casterly Rock and uproot the Lannister family. Use slaughter, destruction, and destruction to tell those self-righteous nobles who you are. Do you know? The nature of the world is cruel. All the seemingly beautiful emotions like kindness, sympathy, love, and friendship are fatal poisons to a king. To become a king, you have to be prepared to be alone for the rest of your life. The only thing that will accompany you for life is power. As long as you can stabilize your royal power, do not hesitate even if you order the slaughter of thousands of rebels. Otherwise, the country will fall apart, and more civilians will taste the pain of war again. Chapter 980. What was a ruler? A ruler used justice, kindness, and freedom as pretexts to do the cruelest and most heartless things. This was especially true in Westeros, a land with a perfect feudal system. Only the most powerful and ruthless nobles had the right to sit on the Iron Throne and give orders. How did the Targaryens become royalty? Was it the justice and kindness of Aegon the Conqueror that moved those lords and kings? No. It was the dragons. The destructive power of the dragon made all the nobles feel fear, and they obediently knelt down and chose to submit. Robert Baratheon also didn't ascend the throne for reasons of justice or kindness. Instead, he had crushed Rhaegar to death in the Battle of the Trident and used undisguised violence to overthrow the Targaryen dynasty. Only then did he ascend the throne. In the rebellion of the Five Princes, every single one of them had a large army and a noble supporting them. In the end, there was only one factor that could decide who the Iron Throne belonged to: power. Power that was unparalleled. In the world of the Song of Ice and Fire, the only power that was recognized by both nobles and commoners was the king that soared in the skies, the dragons. Almost all the wise and mighty monarchs did one thing without exception, and that was to suppress the endless greed and desires of the nobles under them. A few minutes later, when Daenerys returned to the Imperial Conference Room again, the ministers who were still arguing immediately shut their mouths at the same time, their eyes revealing unconcealable fear and horror. She hadn't returned alone. She had brought Colo Kelba and Zhang Qing with her. The formless energy field emanating from the divine dragon's body made even the knights who had undergone strict training find it difficult to breathe, not to mention those old fellows whose bodies had long been hollowed out by wine and women. Thump, thump, thump. Everyone present could clearly hear their hearts beating faster and faster. Some couldn't take it anymore and even began to bleed from their noses and mouth. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. In the name of the Queen, I now declare that the Lannister family and its subordinates are officially stripped of all noble titles, lands, and assets. They have become traitors to the kingdom. There is only one outcome for them, and that is to be completely destroyed. Tell me, which of you agrees and which of you disagrees? Daenerys asked loudly from atop the dragon's back. The nobles, who were usually full of themselves, were now like little chicks who had their necks stuck. None of them dared to make a sound. They all lowered their heads and tried their best to show their most humble and submissive side. One had to know that in the civil war that broke out not long ago, those who had integrity and a sense of honor were basically all dead. The remaining ones were basically those who were good at changing sides and wouldn't jump out to seek their own death. Only the heavens knew if the gigantic dragon would open its mouth and spit out a scorching dragon breath in the next moment. Enjoying such an interesting scene, Zhang Qing couldn't help but laugh. As he laughed, he said sarcastically, "Dear, did you see that? This was the true face of the nobles. To deal with them, what you need is not to reason with them, but to hold the sword in your hand tightly." If someone had stood out to object just now, what would I have done? Daenerys turned around and asked curiously. Very simple. Categorize that person and his family into the Lannister camp, then uproot them and kill them all, regardless of their gender, age, or age. Remember, nothing strengthens memories more than bloodshed and ensures that no noble dares to easily start a rebellion. In fact, your father, Aerys too, did well in this regard. Although his mental state was slightly abnormal, almost everyone feared him. The only regret was that he didn't have a dragon, so he was defeated by the usurper, Robert. Zhang Qing deliberately pretended to be nonchalant as he explained. Without a doubt, he was taking the opportunity to instill his dark ideals in this queen, who had no experience in governance, and wanted to see if he could cultivate her into a qualified tyrant. That's right. A tyrant. A monarch who relied on great power and iron fists to rule the country. Damn it. Who are you? How dare you bewitch His Majesty? An old man who looked to be in his 70s or 80s finally couldn't help but stand out and berate loudly. He couldn't believe it. If the queen really did so, then she would be a great threat to all the nobles. No one would like a powerful king who held absolute power over life and death. This was also the reason why the monarchs in history who had accomplished great things were never rated highly. On the contrary, those mediocre people who did nothing and left the task of governing the country to their subordinates would often receive extremely high ratings in the end. Me? Zhang Qing jumped down from the dragon's back and calmly walked up to the old man, replying meaningfully, "My name is Mason Aspirin, Lord of Riverbend, Duke of Highcourt, and lawful husband of Queen Daenerys. Now tell me, how do you want to die, old man?" Mason? The old man's pupils suddenly contracted, and he immediately took a few steps back. "Dear Oberyn, can I trouble you with a small favor?" Zhang Qing ignored the old man's panicked reaction and turned his gaze to the Red Viper. "Of course, it would be my honor." Oberyn placed a hand on his chest and bowed very solemnly. As one of the participants of the entire plan, he knew better than anyone else how terrifying this seemingly harmless young man was. He was even comparable to tens of thousands of well-equipped soldiers. Moreover, he was the representative of Dorne in King's Landing and knew which side he should take at this time. "Thank you. I'll trouble you to uproot this old man and his family. Early tomorrow morning, I want to see their corpses hung on the city walls." Zhang Qing gave the order without hesitation. Kill one to warn the rest. Many times, the simpler and cruder the way to deal with things, the better the result. As for starting a rebellion, or playing tricks like poison or assassination, he didn't care at all. He even faintly hoped that someone would jump out and help him pass the time. At least until Valenti confirmed that there was no danger in this world and told him the location of the key to the fourth seal, he had to stay here obediently. "Understood. Please don't worry, there's no need to wait until tomorrow morning. Before the sun sets today, I can settle this matter." As soon as he finished speaking, Oberyn Martell suddenly pulled out his sword and pierced the old man's heart from behind. He then grabbed the old man's leg and dragged him out, leaving a trail of blood on the ground. Chapter 981. Some people said that power was the art of fighting for dominance. A smart king would make use of the conflicts and disagreements between his subjects to quietly gain control of power, and then establish his supreme position in handling government affairs. However, it was a pity that intelligent rulers were often in the minority, especially when it came to decisions based on blood relations. Most of them could barely be considered mediocre at best. Under normal circumstances, seizing power was often accompanied by internal strife and bloodshed. Very few rulers could take back their power without shedding blood. At the very least, Daenerys Targaryen was incapable of accomplishing such a complicated plan that was beyond her capabilities. Therefore, Zhang Qing taught her how to use violence and intimidation to make those nobles who were not very obedient learn humility and obedience through a lesson. As the corpses of the finance minister and his entire family were hung on the city walls, the Imperial Council passed the proposal to send troops to attack the Lannister family that refused to submit to the rule of the King's Landing. In less than 2 days, an army of more than 50,000 was gathered and marched towards Casterly Rock. Along the way, the private armies of the nobles joined in. By the time they were 20 kilometers away from Casterly Rock, the number of troops under the Queen's command had reached a shocking 100,000. Among them were 15,000 cavalry and more than 800 knights, all clad in sturdy armor from head to toe. Of course, this wasn't what made the enemy despair the most. What made the vassals of the Lannister family feel the most despair was the gigantic figure that constantly circled in the sky, the unkillable mystic dragon Colo-Kelba. Look at those pitiful fellows. They've all fallen into panic and despair. I can guarantee that more than half of them will turn and flee the moment the battle begins. Oberyn put down the telescope he used for navigation and spoke with undisguised contempt. When Tywin was still alive, the Lannister family had been glorious. Not only did they have an army that could fight, they had also defeated almost all of their competitors and were only one step away from completely controlling the Iron Throne. But now? All that was left was a bunch of idiots clinging to the so-called pride and glory of their family. Of course, it was also possible that fear prevented them from surrendering. After all, half of the continent's inhabitants knew what Lannister had done to House Targaryen in order to curry favor with Robert. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was insane. God knows if they would be greeted with a massacre if they surrendered. Most of the time, the losers were unwilling to surrender even though they knew they had lost. This was the reason. When can we attack? Daenerys narrowed her eyes and looked into the distance, pretending to be cold. After trying for a few days, she gradually found that every time she put on a stern face, those officials who were originally unbridled would be particularly cautious, and there was a little more respect and fear in their eyes. Without a doubt, this was the change in power and dominance. Don't worry. Remember, this is not a war, but a public execution. Our goal is to let everyone see with their own eyes what the consequences of rebellion are. Therefore, killing and destroying are not the whole goal. The real goal is to firmly brand fear into the depths of everyone's heart. Zhang Qing touched his chin and explained meaningfully. Oh? What are you going to do? Oberyn asked curiously. It's very simple. First, we'll create panic and make the citizens realize that Casterly Rock isn't as indestructible as they think. With that, Zhang Qing raised his arm and shot a dazzling red light into the sky. The next second, the dragon that had been hovering in the sky suddenly swooped down, opening its bloody mouth and spewing a fatal dragon's breath along the city walls. Thousands of soldiers who had been waiting were burned to ashes just like that. Even the city walls made of hard rock melted into boiling lava. Fortunately, Colo-Kelba had no intention of continuing to attack the other walls and fortresses. After destroying one of the walls, it quickly climbed back up to a height of several hundred meters. It took less than 15 seconds to make the nobles and commoners of Casterly Rock understand that the city could not be defended. After a short silence, Daenerys's soldiers immediately burst into enthusiastic cheers. Some of them, who were full of adrenaline, even rode their warhorses to the bottom of the city walls and roared, venting the excitement in their hearts. For an army, nothing could raise morale more than an easy victory. In addition, Casterly Rock was the home of the Lannister family, and its wealth far exceeded that of most towns. It was rumored that the treasury under the castle was filled with gold mined from the mines. In short, as long as they robbed it once, they would be able to find it for the rest of their lives. In Westeros, armies were no different from bandit. Many vicious and merciless fellows had even begun to think about massacring the entire city. While Casterly Rock was plunged into unprecedented panic and chaos, Valenti had already secretly left the happy lair that made him forget to return through a secret passage. He was still looking for information in the inns and bars of King's Landing. Whether it was the myths and legends of ancient times, the lost civilizations, or the rumors of supernatural powers all over the world, he would rather kill the wrong person than let them go. It took him about 2 or 3 days to sort out a notebook that wasn't too thick. A few of the things he had marked with a red pen were things that he thought were a threat to him. Colo Kelbo was at the top of the list. As for the rest, they included the already extinct Valyria, the Shadowlands where supernatural powers were most active, the otherworldly demons outside the Great Wall of the North, the Children of the Forest who had disappeared from sight, the Lord of Light, and so on. It had to be said that Valenti's ability to survive until now was mostly due to his cautiousness. He wasn't a fool and knew not to be fooled by superficial appearances. He directly searched for the most essential parts of the world. But in general, he was quite satisfied with this place called Westeros. Even if a terrible disaster were to happen, he was confident that he could survive it. In any case, he hadn't found any signs of the world's destruction from the fragments of the future. However, Valenti didn't know that the future world he saw didn't include the rapidly growing undead army in the north. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 982. The Northern Territory. Deviants? Perhaps I should go and confirm it myself, Valenti muttered to himself as he stared at the notes in his hands. Like Zhang Qing, he was also someone who lacked a sense of security. The only difference between the two was that when Zhang Qing felt threatened, he would fall into a state of mind that was a mixture of rationality and madness. However, Valenti only wanted to escape from danger and find a safe place to hide. After all, his ability was to predict what might happen in the future from the chaotic fragments, and it was the nature of most humans to avoid misfortune and seek good luck. Thus, running away was an inevitable choice. Many Chicken Soup for the Soul repeatedly emphasized that one must face difficulties head-on. Otherwise, once one ran away, they were destined to be mediocre for the rest of their lives. However, looking at the history of mankind, there were very few people who dared to face difficulties and dangers head-on. Most people subconsciously chose to run away. However, Zhang Qing was the exact opposite. He hated fatalism and never thought that the future was fixed. He was even unwilling to learn any prophecy magic and firmly believed that his power could change the future. The difference in personality and thinking between the two caused them to have completely different styles of doing things. Just as Valenti hired a carriage and left King's Landing and headed north along the King's Road, intending to take a look at the Great Wall and ask about deviants, Casterly Rock finally welcomed the prelude to destruction. Early in the morning, hundreds of catapults hurled canisters filled with wildfire into the city in a parabola. In the blink of an eye, a large expanse of green flames rose into the sky and quickly spread among the wooden houses. In a short 10 minutes, half of the city was engulfed in a sea of fire. Screams and cries of despair rang out incessantly. There was no need to ask to know that these dangerous things were found in King's Landing. They were originally terrifying weapons that the Targaryen family commissioned alchemists to secretly research after they lost their dragon. They were used to intimidate the nobles who harbored evil intentions. Today they finally came in handy. Attack! Attack! Archers! Shoot! Accompanied by the hoarse shouts of the noble officers, approximately 6,000 infantrymen began to approach the eastern wall that had already been melted by the dragon flames. In front of them were less than 3,500 soldiers armed with shields and spears. They were stationed in place, intending to use their bodies to make a final stand. There were no surprises. After enduring a short baptism of arrows, the soldiers on both sides immediately entered a bitter melee. Everyone knew that hand-to-hand combat was an anaerobic exercise that consumed a lot of energy. Even after a long period of training, one would not be able to persist for too long. Generally speaking, an army with a sound system would usually adopt a rotation system, which was to let the veterans in the first row fight for a period of time, then retreat and let the soldiers at the back take over to get a short rest and recovery time. Due to differences in race and level of training, this time varied from 3 to 5 minutes. This also meant that a person could only fight with a weapon for a maximum of 5 minutes. Once 5 minutes passed, the person would immediately fall into a state of fatigue. What kind of one-on-one duel would last for 180 rounds? Those were all lies. A true expert could often decide life and death in an instant. There was not the slightest bit of fancy moves, skills, or movements. Unfortunately, the armies of Westeros were still in a state of ignorance and chaos. Most of the soldiers were either the private armies of nobles or hired mercenaries. Once they entered a state of chaos, tactical commands were completely ineffective. It all depended on individual performance. Relying on their advantage in numbers, Daenerys's troops quickly broke the enemy's formation, cutting them apart and encircling them before annihilating them bit by bit. When the death toll on both sides reached 1,000, the soldiers loyal to Lannister finally broke down. They threw away their weapons and turned to run, even though green wildfire was everywhere behind them. The remaining soldiers saw that their defeat was a foregone conclusion and immediately rushed in like a swarm of bees. While ferociously killing every enemy that was left behind, they unscrupulously kicked open houses, some robbed property, and some raped women. Looking at the hellish scene in front of him, Oberyn took a deep breath and sighed. They're finished. After today, Casterly Rock and Lannister will be history. But I have a question. How do you plan to deal with the West? You must know that without a powerful family to hold the fort, this land will be filled with chaos, slaughter, and death. Don't worry, I plan to promote at least 50 knights, 4 barons, and 2 viscounts from the soldiers who have made contributions. These fellows promoted from the bottom of society are naturally loyal allies of the royal power. They will keep an eye on the West for Her Majesty. If anyone dares to cause trouble, what awaits them will be ruthless destruction and death. Zhang Qing replied nonchalantly. Although he understood that promoting commoners from the bottom to nobles meant greed and corruption. But history on Earth had proven many times that the only way to overthrow the monopoly of the nobles was to promote commoners and suppress this huge interest group from within. Wow. Big move. I have to admit, although many people have called me a lunatic before, compared to you, I'm clearly not crazy enough. Promoting 50 knights, 4 barons, and 2 viscounts from the commoners at once, I can guarantee that this will attract countless protests and objections. Oberyn raised his eyebrows, his tone full of schadenfreude. What was a noble? A noble bloodline. To put it bluntly, it was a competition of ancestors. Your father, your grandfather, your grandfather's father, and your grandfather's grandfather, at least for 5 generations, must have a noble title, otherwise they will be ostracized by all the nobles. The most typical example was the Onion Knight Davos Seaworth. Although he was deeply trusted by Stannis, the old nobles had never truly acknowledged him, and even mocked him time and time again for his low birth. Protests? Objections? Zhang Qing slightly raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a meaningful sneer. Do you think I care about this? No. Dear Oberyn, I will use practical actions to prove that the so-called resistance of the nobles is as powerless as a teenage girl in front of a strong rogue. After saying this, Zhang Qing cast his gaze not far away, where Daenerys was frowning. The queen was clearly not used to such a brutal scene of massacres. Several times, she opened her mouth to order to stop the slaughter of commoners and plunder, but unfortunately, the current chaotic situation made her lose control of the army, and even the noble officer in charge of commanding could not be found. Chapter 983. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Zhang Qing quietly came behind Daenerys and asked softly in a low voice. Anyone who was not blind could see that the young queen did not like war, especially this kind of war filled with cruelty, violence, robbery, and murder. Do we have to do this? I mean completely destroy Casterly Rock. After all, the civilians are innocent. They should not pay the price for the mistakes made by the Lannister family. Daenerys frowned subconsciously, her eyes revealing undisguised disgust. Naive. Zhang Qing sneered and explained, remember? My dear. No one in this world is innocent. Think about it carefully. Without the support of the citizens of Casterly Rock, would the remnants of the Lannister family have the courage to rely on this city to refuse to swear allegiance to King's Landing? Don't forget, they have ruled this land for too long. Even many civilians subconsciously believe that the Lannisters are the ones they should be loyal to. So in order to announce to the world that the Lannisters are history, you must destroy the foundation they rely on for survival, which is Casterly Rock and the people who live in it. This has nothing to do with good or evil. It's just political considerations. In short, you can't let those hiding in the darkness have delusions and use blood, slaughter, and death to announce who is the supreme ruler of this country. But don't you think it's too cruel? Daenerys sighed slightly. Cruel? Zhang Qing shook his head without thinking. No, I don't think it's cruel at all. On the contrary, it's because of your indecisiveness that this disaster happened today. If you had made up your mind earlier and used force to destroy the Lannister family, then Casterly Rock could have been preserved intact. So let go of your ridiculous pity. As a monarch, only by abandoning hypocritical kindness and maintaining absolute coldness and rationality can you rule a country well. You mean all of this is my fault? Daenerys subconsciously clenched her fists, her expression a little agitated. Is it not? Please tell me, what is the responsibility of a king? Have you fulfilled your duty? No, you didn't. You were just like an ignorant little girl letting those nobles play with you. If it weren't for me, you might have already become a plaything for those male nobles and a breeding tool. Do not always think that House Targaryen is something to be proud of. You and your ancestors are but insignificant survivors of the ancient Valyrian civilization. Zhang Qing did not give the other party any face at all. He directly tore apart history and pointed at the weakest, most fearful, and most helpless place in Daenerys' heart. Bloodline and surname. It was never something to be proud of. Especially in this world where one's bloodline could not provide them with great power, it was best to always remember that one was just an insignificant mortal so that one could live better. In your eyes, I'm a stupid and conceited idiot, right? Daenerys was clearly infuriated by those words, and flames of anger shot out of her eyes. But in the end, for some reason, she held it in and returned to her tent. Her face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping water. Watching her figure gradually disappear into the distance, Zhang Qing couldn't help but smile and sigh. What's that saying again? Oh right. Politics makes women go away. Overly emotional thinking will never allow them to be qualified schemers and schemers. At the same time, far away from the Great Wall of Despair, Death Knight Shuma was leading his ever-growing undead army to attack the barbarian tribes they encountered along the way. Those with powerful souls were all transformed into banshees, death knights, and necromancers. Those with powerful bodies were transformed into skeletal soldiers, zombies, and stitched abominations. There were also many craftsmen who had been turned into living dead, working day and night to create the various tools and weapons needed by the army. This was because Shuma could feel that those creatures called deviant ghosts had already sensed his arrival and were planning to start a war to determine the control of the extreme north. Sir, the meat grinder army has been formed. We need more corpses now, fresh corpses, a withered necromancer reminded carefully. As one of the few undead who retained his memories from when he was alive, He had witnessed the terrifying scene of Schumer releasing his power without restraint. It was definitely not something that humans could contend against, so his tone was filled with fear. Don't think that the dead won't feel fear. In fact, all living beings with the ability to think independently would instinctively feel a strong sense of fear. The so-called undead that did not feel fear referred to the low-level undead that did not have the ability to think like cannon fodder. High-level undead like liches, death knights, banshees, necromancers, and so on still maintained a considerable degree of reverence for death itself. Oh? How many meat grinders do we have now? Xiaoma stared at him with his cold eyes. 300. But due to the lack of corpses, we can't maximize the power of the magic plague, the necromancer quickly answered. Very good. Don't worry about the corpses, we will soon have countless corpses. At this point, Shuma's stiff lips curled up slightly, and a chilling smile appeared on his face. He subconsciously drew the large sword on his back. This was because he could already see through the eyes of the death dragon that was constantly circling in the sky that a few strange-looking humanoid creatures were driving thousands of living corpses through the canyon not far ahead. At most half a day, the two sides would meet and engage in a fierce battle. The necromancer seemed to be frightened by this sinister smile, and hurriedly lowered his head humbly and flattered, "As you wish, great undead king. Any obstacles in your way are destined to be mercilessly crushed. Tell you and your brothers to prepare to build a death array. I want those idiots to understand that their laughable necromancy magic is worthless in my eyes." Understood. Following Shuma's command, the huge war machine quickly moved. Relying on their bodies that did not need to rest and did not feel tired, the undead army arrived at the predetermined battlefield in a short 3 hours, and started to build a battle line in full swing. As for the arrogant deviant ghosts, they did not realize how terrifying the enemy they were facing this time. They still believed that they could use their absolute advantage in numbers to destroy all living beings. Chapter 984. There were no surprises. When the undead army formed the first line of defense, the deviant ghosts appeared on the snowy horizon. Of course, due to their relatively small numbers, the ones at the front were the living corpses that emitted a faint aura of death. Moreover, because the extreme north was frozen all year round, the flesh of the living corpses did not rot. At least, most of them still retained their appearance when they were alive. There were so many of them that one could not see the end of them. It was unknown whether there were tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of them. However, numbers were not the most important factor for both sides of the battle. What really decided the outcome of this battle was whether the Night King or Xiaoma had greater control over the dead. In less than 10 minutes, the swarm of living corpses rushed towards the undead army that was waiting in formation, unfolding a chaotic battle that the human world could never imagine. There was no formation. There was no need for command. There was also no so-called strategy. Some of them did not even have a decent weapon in their hands. They completely relied on their hands, teeth, and other primitive weapons to fight. Interesting. They seemed to be life forms formed purely from energy. They used this energy to resurrect the dead and control them. Xiaoma touched his chin and muttered to himself in a low voice. Although he was not very good at complex thinking, he could still feel that extremely strange energy. It was as if life forms were distorted and presented in a completely opposite situation. Different from the pure energy of death, deviant ghosts were clearly a special life form that was artificially created. They did not even have the ability to reproduce themselves. They completely relied on energy transmission to change the situation of life and continuously strengthen their own race. Although it sounded very high and mighty, the weakness was also very obvious. The strength of the newly born deviant ghosts was far inferior to those old deviant ghosts that had lived for God knows how many years. Only a single soul shock was needed to kill them all. "My lord, when do we activate the death array?" The necromancer moved closer and asked in a low voice. He did not even have the interest to take a look at the all-out battle that had erupted in front of him. All of his attention was focused on the magic ritual that was being conducted by the 6 necromancers at the back. Don't be anxious. Let's wait a little longer. It's best to let the enemy send in more troops. Also, get the meat grinder to start throwing large pieces of obsidian. I want to see how long the enemy commander can last. Xiaoma stroked his chin and gave the order without hesitation. The greatest advantage of commanding an undead army was that you didn't have to worry about the lack of soldiers. As long as you could win the battle, you could basically have as many cannon fodder as you wanted. This was especially true when you were fighting against living humans. As long as you weren't completely killed in an instant, you could rapidly increase your strength in a short period of time. Creak, 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 accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of wood rubbing against each other, a row of over 100 meat grinders was pushed to the front line. With the help of the zombie slave workers, the platinum heavy rocks were placed into their designated positions, then thrown towards the enemy's rear in a parabola. Boom, 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 boom. Every piece of black stone that fell from the sky could smash a bunch of unlucky people to death. No matter if they were living corpses or deviant ghosts, none of them could escape death. Having been stationed near the ruins of the Valyrian civilization for so many years, Xiaoma had already unearthed countless treasures that this world would go crazy over. Large amounts of Valyrian steel weapons that had been melted down and reforged were just one of them, and these black stones were another. Obsidian, or dragon crystal, was without a doubt one of the deadliest nemeses of deviant ghosts. No matter if they were scratched or directly smashed, their flesh and bones would quickly melt and turn into a pool of cold liquid. Sensing that their weakness had been discovered by their opponent, the deviant ghosts suddenly became somewhat flustered. Nearly a third of them even retreated continuously, trying to escape the attack range of the meat grinders. At the same time, they controlled their living corpses to swarm forward and buy themselves some time. Looking at the dense swarm of cannon fodder, Xiaoma finally cracked a sinister smile. Without turning his head, he ordered, "What are you waiting for? Activate the death array." I can't wait to see the stunned expression on the enemy commander's face. I'm sure it will be very impressive. The necromancer smiled sinisterly and returned to his original position. He raised his hands high and began to loudly chant an incantation. In a short 10 seconds, a layer of gray fog suddenly enveloped the chaotic battlefield. The deviant ghosts that had been controlled by the death energy suddenly seemed to have been injected with stimulant. Their strength, speed, agility, and reaction speed were all greatly enhanced. On the other hand, the living corpses that were controlled by deviant ghosts began to twitch uncontrollably. After a short while, the blue pupils in their eyes lost their light and were replaced by the aura of despair of death. They turned around and attacked the deviant ghost. Needless to say, this was the true function of the death array. It used negative energy to corrode the corpses, freeing them from the control of their original owners and allowing them to join the army of the undead. After all, compared to the primitive magic invented by the children of the forest, both the necromancy magic of Faerun and the psychic magic of Azeroth were far superior. Furthermore, deviant ghosts were not the creators of this energy. On the contrary, they were just a group of users who did not know anything. They did not understand the nature of the energy that supported their own survival, and they did not have enough people to conduct in-depth research. Xiaoma immediately jumped onto the back of the death dragon and soared into the sky while admiring the spectacular scene of the army of the undead swarming forward. He raised the chilling magic sword in his hand and went straight for the leader of the deviant ghosts, the Night Lord. Ah! The Night Lord, who had sensed the danger, roared and threw the sharp ice spear in his hand without hesitation. Unfortunately, not only did this attack not hit the target, but it was also caught by the death dragon and thrown back with a claw. Bang! With the terrifying power of gravity acceleration, an unlucky deviant ghost was pierced through the chest and nailed to the ground. Surrender or be destroyed. Choose. Xioma read the ultimatum loudly from above. He had a feeling that if these deviant ghosts joined his army of the undead, they would be able to reach a higher level and even create a new subspecies of the undead. However, the Night Lord did not intend to surrender. He jumped up and tried to launch another attack. However, before he could throw the ice spear for the second time, the death dragon swooped down and opened its mouth full of sharp teeth. With a crunch, the death dragon crushed the Night Lord's head and sucked out a silver translucent soul from the shattered body and swallowed it with a look of enjoyment. Chapter 985. The Great Wall of Despair, the last barrier of human civilization in the north of Westeros. Although most people had already forgotten how this majestic and tall wall was built and what kind of enemy it was used to defend against, the vast majority of people had already forgotten. Even Night's Watch only saw it as a barrier against the barbarians north of the wall. In their eyes, the barbarians who often charged into villages to kill and pillage were the most dangerous enemies in this world of ice and snow. No one knew that while the humans were wasting their precious time on endless infighting deep in the glacial valleys of the extreme north, a war that involved hundreds of thousands of people had just come to an end. The powerful undead had taken over the control of thousands of living corpses from the other ghosts and imprisoned those who were willing to surrender. The necromancers were in charge of the follow-up research. These unlucky souls didn't realize what kind of cruel and painful experiments awaited them. It was hard to say if they could even survive. After all, the necromancers weren't kind people. As long as they could get the results they wanted, they didn't care about the lives of the living corpses. My lord, according to the information provided by the deviants, the humans living in the north of the Great Wall of Despair are rapidly gathering, and there are many living giants among them. Do you think we should immediately launch an attack and wipe them all out? A Death Knight in black armor took the initiative to suggest. As one of the few high-ranking commanders of this undead army who had retained their consciousness when they were alive, he could clearly feel the hatred for living beings in his heart. This wasn't a negative feeling caused by envy or jealousy, but an instinct that came from the depths of his soul. Pursue? No. This isn't something we should do. Why don't we let the surrendered other ghosts do it? Don't forget, before Master gives the order, our mission is to continuously strengthen ourselves and not expose ourselves to the humans. Xioma shook his head without thinking. You mean, to let the other ghosts test the humans' reaction on our behalf? A trace of surprise appeared on the Death Knight's pale face. That's right. Release half of the other ghosts and give them 20,000 living corpses to chase after the barbarians to the edge of the Great Wall of Despair. We can use this time to properly digest the fruits of our victory. Remember, don't use the habits of the humans to measure the undead. We are messengers of death. Once we appear in front of the living, it means destruction. After saying that, Xioma fiercely stabbed the powerful demon's sword into the ice, awakening all the frozen corpses that had been buried under the ice for who knew how many years. They began to methodically build war machines in preparation for an even larger scale war. Unknowingly, half a month had passed. With the Lannister family completely removed from the circle of nobles and Casterly Rock destroyed, Daenerys finally led the army back to King's Landing and began to learn how to handle complicated government affairs personally under the guidance of Zhang Qing. No one noticed that a stranger had quietly arrived in the cold north. Damn it! This damned place reminds me of the winter in northern Europe, Volenti grumbled as he pulled his cloak closer to the carriage. Even though he had mastered many miraculous abilities, he would not use them unless he had no other choice. As for the reason, it was extremely simple. He understood that he couldn't be considered to be strong, so not only would recklessly displaying his strength not bring him any benefits, it would instead easily bring him a fatal disaster. Maintaining a sense of humility in front of the strong and maintaining a sense of mystery in front of opponents of the same level was his way of survival. Fortunately, this torturous journey didn't last long. A group of knights in black armor and capes broke the silence. The man in the lead circled around the carriage before shouting at the top of his voice, "Who are you? Why are you approaching Dark Castle? Greetings, respected rangers of the Night's Watch. I'm from King's Landing, and I'm a curious traveler. I've heard of the famous Night Watchers guarding the Great Wall, and I'd like to see them with my own eyes." Warrant hurriedly jumped down from the carriage and bowed slightly with one hand on his chest. "Traveler? Are you sure you're not a lunatic?" The knight in the lead raised an eyebrow, his eyes filled with undisguised mockery. The Night's Watch was no longer the glorious organization it was a long time ago. Almost all of the Night's Watch members were either nobles who couldn't survive or criminals who were sent here. Even so, there were less than 1,000 people left in the Night's Watch, and their supplies were pitifully low. They could almost be described as a beggar army. Of course not. I'm mentally sound. Oh right, I've also brought gifts for you heroes. A whole carriage of ham and sausages from King's Landing and 5,000 gold coins. In order to show his sincerity, Valenti directly lifted the carriage pulled by 2 horses, revealing the good stuff inside. The light emitted by the gold coins made a few people who had just been released from their criminal status restless. They even put their hands on the hilts of their swords and looked at each other crazily. The leader of the knights had undoubtedly noticed this. He immediately drew his sword and warned loudly, "All of you better behave yourselves, if you don't want to die." Without a doubt, he was quite a deterrent to these scum who used to be bandits. Just one sentence was enough to calm them down. Although some of them still had a strong sense of unwillingness in their eyes, they no longer dared to look directly at the gold coins in the carriage. After confirming that the alarm had been lifted, the knight in the lead finally let out a sigh of relief. He rode his horse to the side of the carriage, picked up a gold coin, put it in his mouth and gently bit it. Then he laughed happily. "Ha ha ha ha! Good heavens! It's a real gold coin. Well, I'm starting to believe what you said. Come, I'll take you back to Dark Castle. Commander Geo Mormont will be very happy that someone sent him so much money and meat at this time." "Thank you very much. It's my greatest honor to receive the broadband of His Excellency the Commander." Valenti's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. He drove the carriage again, and slowly followed the knight in the carriage towards the somewhat dilapidated castle not far away. After about 20 minutes, the group passed through the gate and entered what could barely be considered one of the safest places in the borderlands. Strictly speaking, Dark Castle was not a real castle. The east, west, and west sides of the castle were not protected by walls. Only the north side was protected by the Great Wall. The rest of the castle was made up of stone towers and wooden fortresses. Chapter 986. Hey! Come out and see. Corin brought back a stranger. Oh my God! There's so much ham and sausages in the carriage. We're in for a treat tonight. Shut up, idiot. Put the gold coins back. Stay away from the carriage. Otherwise, I don't mind chopping off your hands. Could it be that the nobles in King's Landing finally remembered us poor worms and sent people to deliver urgently needed military funds and supplies? Due to their isolation from the outside world, the Night Watchers had endured unimaginable loneliness and pain for a long time. Therefore, they were particularly excited to see a stranger, especially one who brought urgently needed meat and money. As the Commander-in-Chief of Night's Watch, Geo Mormont heard the commotion outside and hurried out of the tower. He shouted, "Quiet! What happened?" "Your Excellency, I met a stranger when I was patrolling. He claimed to be a curious traveler and wanted to see our Night's Watch with his own eyes. He also brought a carriage full of ham, sausages, and 5,000 shiny gold coins." Corin dismounted and reported to the Commander-in-Chief in a low voice. "What? 5,000 gold coins?" Geo Mormont's eyes widened in disbelief. Not long ago, He sent people to King's Landing to ask for some military funds from the newly ascended Queen, but who knew that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer would chase them away and give them less than 1,500 gold coins. But now, someone was willing to take out 5,000 gold coins at once. This was more generous than any king or duke. In order to confirm the authenticity of the news, the old man, who was as strong as a bear, quickly walked to the side of the carriage and personally ordered his men to count the gold coins piled up in the wooden chest. He then bent down and bowed deeply. "Thank you for your generous donation, stranger. On behalf of all the night watchers, I would like to express my utmost respect to you. You have helped us solve our urgent needs. Please don't be so polite, Commander-in-Chief. It's my honor to be able to contribute to Night's Watch." Valenti fully displayed his ability to speak the human language, and his eyes revealed a trace of sincerity. "Ha ha ha ha. I didn't expect that in this era, there would still be people who respect us night watchers. Bo and Maxie, tell the kitchen to prepare a sumptuous dinner. We have to welcome our friend in the grandest way." Geo Mormont laughed and gave the order to the chief. After all, with the strong purchasing power of gold coins in the north, 5,000 gold coins was enough to sustain Night's Watch for a long time. Very quickly, under Warrant's superb acting skills, the soldiers of the Night Watch army gradually let down their guard. They raised their wine glasses and drank to their heart's content, eating the delicious ham and grilled sausages that they could not get to eat on a normal day. The rich aroma of meat reverberated in the noisy hall, and some people even sang at the top of their lungs. When the atmosphere of the banquet reached its climax, he finally could not help but take the initiative to ask, "Commander-in-Chief, I heard that there are many published stories in the north of the Great Wall. Among them, there is a monster called the Deviant Ghost." "Deviant Ghost?" Dio Mormont frowned subconsciously. Not only him, but several senior night watchers' expressions changed slightly. Jon Snow opened his mouth several times, wanting to say something, but in the end, he closed his mouth for some reason. For a moment, the surrounding air became a little heavy. After a full minute, the Commander-in-Chief took a deep breath and replied, "No. I've never seen any deviant. Those are horror stories used to scare children. Compared to the deviants, those savage barbarians are the real threat. For hundreds of years, they have attacked the Great Wall again and again, trying to seize our land. If you're interested, I can have someone take you outside the Great Wall." "Really? That's great." Valenti pretended to be excited. But in his heart, he was certain that the deviants were real, and not some horror story used to scare children. But for some reason, those who knew the inside story were not willing to tell the truth. After confirming the real threat of the deviants, Valenti joined the Ranger Patrol early the next morning and began to leave the protection of the Great Wall, heading towards the endless ice field. For a week, he was unable to find any supernatural phenomenon. The biggest threat was just the hungry predators and a dozen barbarians who looked like they had not eaten for days. In this frozen land, food was so scarce that it was impossible to feed a large population. The cruel nature had activated the law of survival of the fittest, allowing life to kill each other and obtain the necessary resources for survival from each other. Of course, Valenti had seen this scene a long time ago in Northern Europe, so he did not find it strange. What was truly strange was that a savage named Cast seemed to be trying his best to hide something. He could feel that there was an extremely strange magical energy around the house. "Why are you interested in that old man?" Corin looked at the slightly old caster from the corner of his eye and asked. Valenti nodded with a serious expression. "Yes, I'm very interested. But it's not about incest with his daughter, it's about his strange attitude. Don't you find it strange? According to those women, all the baby boys would be sacrificed to the gods in the forest after they were born. But so far, no one has seen the bodies of those babies, not even the blood stains or the bite marks of wild beasts. It's as if someone took them away silently." "So you're saying that the god he believes in is real?" Corin sneered and twitched his mouth. He might be an excellent scout and warrior, but he was definitely not a smart person who was good at using his brain. No. What I'm saying is that maybe the god he believes in is the deviant ghost in the legends, and those baby boys who were sacrificed didn't die at all. They were taken away by the deviant ghost. Valenti revealed the scene he observed from the future. As a person who liked to keep secrets, he had never told anyone that his ability to predict the future was actually limited in many ways. One of them was that he had to obtain the corresponding trigger condition in advance. This condition could be something, or it could be the blood, energy, clothes, books, etc. Obviously, before encountering a real deviant ghost or touching the things they left behind, Valenti could not clearly see what they looked like, where they were born, and whether they would be a threat to the human world in the future. Chapter 987. King's Descent. Red Keep, the military and political center of the Seven Kingdoms, as well as the place where the royal family lived. It got its name because it was completely made of light red stone. 7 huge iron-roofed drum towers were like resolute guards, guarding the descendants of Aegon the Conqueror at all times. Even if King's Descent fell, the castle was strong enough to withstand any kind of attack other than a dragon's. If the outer walls of King's Descent were the city's protective umbrella, then the Red Keep symbolized the royal family's final dignity. It gave them enough time to consider whether to commit suicide or surrender when they encountered an enemy they couldn't defeat. Of course, like all the sturdy fortifications in the world, the Red Keep had been breached several times, but not because of external problems, but because of internal problems. Sitting on an iron throne made of countless longswords, Daenerys was looking at the Prime Minister she had just replaced with a dignified expression. This short, middle-aged man carefully described the important things that had happened in the kingdom recently. He didn't dare to reveal even the slightest bit of his own subjective thoughts and ideas. The reason was simple. The previous Prime Minister who had been removed from his post had not only lost his monstrous power in an instant, but had also been severely reprimanded, to the point that his vassals no longer listened to his orders. Even the family behind him couldn't help but decline. The drawbacks of the feudal system were vividly displayed at this moment. Those seemingly stable pyramid-shaped power structures were in fact completely dependent on the prestige established by the high-ranking nobles over the years, as well as their personal emotions to maintain them. If these two things went wrong at the same time, it would immediately lead to the rapid expansion of the vassals' ambitions. They would begin to challenge the position of the lord, and finally complete the counterattack. Your Majesty. In summary, Peter Baelish has already lost control of the valley. Those nobles who have been loyal to House Arryn for generations have formed an alliance, intending to drive him out and then swear allegiance to King's Descent once more. After saying a bunch of meaningless flattery, the Prime Minister finally concluded in a cadence. In short, House Lannister had been uprooted. Casterly Rock, with its long history, had been reduced to ruins in a single day. This greatly intimidated the nobles of the valley who thought they were strong enough, fearing that they would be treated as traitors and dealt with if they weren't careful. Oh? What did these nobles of the valley say to you? Daenerys didn't hurry to express her position. Instead, she expressionlessly asked the most important part. The Prime Minister hurriedly bowed and explained softly, "It's very simple. They want you to strip Peter Baelish of his title and rank, and declare him a Lannister. In this way, the nobles of the valley would have an excuse to start a war. After all, with his outstanding political skills, Peter Baelish has long been secretly controlling the Eyrie. Only when he becomes a traitor will the knights loyal to House Arryn be forced to make a choice. Since the nobles of the valley have offered conditions, I believe that with Peter Baelish's intelligence and wisdom, he must have offered rather generous conditions as well, right?" Zhang Qing, who had been resting with his eyes closed beside the Iron Throne, suddenly opened his eyes and interjected meaningfully. "Yes, Your Grace. Peter Baelish had offered him the position of Duke of the Eyrie. In return, not only was he willing to swear loyalty to King's Landing, he also agreed to help the royal family keep the North in check and ensure that House Bolton will never be able to sit on the throne of the King of the North. The Prime Minister nodded slightly, deep reverence and fear in his eyes. It must be known that the mystic dragon, Kolo Kelba, who was seen as undefeatable by countless people, was as obedient as a well-trained hound under the control of this young man who looked to be in his early 20s. Moreover, the lords of the entire Riverbend area were unwavering in their support of his every decision. If necessary, he could raise an elite army of more than 100,000 men in a short period of time. Most importantly, Queen Daenerys Targaryen obeyed every word of her only legal husband. It could be said that within the Seven Kingdoms, there was no one else who could contend against her, be it in terms of politics, military, or power. Even Oberyn, the representative of the Dornish royal family with a long history, was one of her staunchest allies. He did not have the slightest intention of replacing her, nor did he show any signs of resistance. Zhang Qing narrowed his eyes as he sized up the somewhat slippery middle-aged man. He asked with a faint smile, "My dear Prime Minister, do you think that the royal family would benefit more from cooperating with the nobles of the valley or Count Peter Baelish? I think that supporting the nobles of the valley is more in line with the royal family's interests. After all, they represent the orthodox power. Peter Baelish is nothing but a parvenu, a despicable person who relied on betrayal to climb to a high position." This time, the Prime Minister was not as cautious as he usually was. He straightforwardly expressed his opinion. However, this was clearly not his opinion alone. It was the opinion of the majority of the nobles. It had to be said that even though Littlefinger prided himself on his intelligence and even saw the chaotic situation in Westeros as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he still did not understand that he had never had the chance to climb to the Iron Throne. His bloodline and background were too low, and he had no military talent. He could neither win the war nor gain the trust of the soldiers. He could only hide in the dark and constantly scheme. Although it seemed that he had paid the least and gained the most, he did not know that he had become the target of public criticism. Almost none of the traditional nobles were willing to be his staunch ally. At the same time, no army was truly willing to fight for him. Interesting point of view. Let's end today's Imperial Conference here. Her Majesty the Queen will announce her decision at this time tomorrow. Zhang Qing slightly raised the corner of his mouth and announced the adjournment of the meeting to the ministers. After these people had completely left, Daenerys could not help but ask, "Why, do you disagree with the Prime Minister's point of view?" "No, of course not." Zhang Qing smiled and shook his head. "You have to understand that in this matter, there is no difference between choosing the nobles of the valley and choosing Peter Baelish. The only key point is what kind of country you want to build. Do you want to let the great nobles build their fiefs into private kingdoms like before, or do you want to strengthen the power of the royal family and directly or indirectly interfere with the Seven Kingdoms? If it's the former, then supporting the nobles of the valley and ensuring that the power structure in their fiefs does not fluctuate is definitely a wise choice. But if it's the latter, then you have to make good use of Peter Baelish as a chess piece and completely break the original power structure of the valley. Take advantage of the situation to plant your own trusted aides and ensure that their power does not fall into the hands of any party. Chapter 988. I don't understand what you mean. Is there a difference between these two ways of ruling a country? Daenerys subconsciously frowned. As she had been constantly wandering from place to place since she was a child, she had never received even the slightest bit of royal elite education. In addition, her horizons were limited, so she was completely unable to understand the huge difference between a feudal system and a centralized system of power. She also didn't understand how enormous and astonishing the potential that could erupt when power was highly centralized. How should I put it? Zhang Qing rubbed his chin and organized his words a little, then he casually explained, Allowing the great nobles to have unrestricted power in their own territories means that they are actually independent kingdoms. The relationship between them and the royal family is not so much that of monarch and vassal, but rather that of collaborators. They share power and rule the entire country together. As a queen, the power in your hands is actually limited. You can't really intervene in the affairs of the various territories. Although on the surface, doing so can greatly reduce the cost and difficulty of ruling, it leads to an increase in the risk of rebellion. Do you remember how your father lost the throne? Robert Baratheon took the initiative to start a war for personal reasons. If he wasn't the Lord of Storm's End Castle, and didn't have an army completely loyal to him, would this situation still have happened? So you think that I should weaken the power of the traditional great nobles like Martell and Arryn, so that they can't establish great prestige and power in their territories like before? Daenerys was clearly not stupid. She immediately realized the crux of the problem. Zhang Qing lightly nodded. That's right. Although so far, from a political point of view, you haven't been able to take back all the power, but it's not a problem to give them some trouble. In particular, the entire Seven Kingdoms have just experienced a war. Famous families like Stark, Tyrell, Lannister, and Tully have all suffered heavy losses, or have directly died out. It's a good opportunity to redistribute the benefit. You can promote some new nobles from the commoners and let them fight against the old nobles. You can act as an arbiter and ensure a weak balance between the two sides. Over time, they will slowly develop a reverence for the royal power. At the same time, they won't be able to casually raise an army to start a rebellion like before. I see. I understand now. This is also why you eliminated the two nobles with the longest history and the greatest influence in River Bend and promoted the leaders of your mercenaries to become new nobles. Daenerys suddenly had a look of realization on her face. After so many days of study, she gradually began to understand the nature of politics and royalty. She also understood how many interests were hidden behind many phenomena that she could not understand before. Yes, it was very effective, wasn't it? Look at River Bend now. There isn't a single powerful family that can truly control the entire region. Everyone has to listen to me, or what awaits them is destruction. Zhang Qing smiled as he revealed the true reason why he had wantonly slaughtered the traditional nobles in River Bend. He could never allow his subordinates to grow too big and out of control. This was the essence of the game of rule and power. Unfortunately, the natives of Westeros, including Aegon the Conqueror, didn't understand this simple logic. They always wantonly enfeoffed nobles time and time again, handing over the ruling rights of a large region to a certain family for hereditary rule. They believed that they could rely on their vows and good personal relationships to ensure that their loyalty would last forever. As expected, the civil strife never stopped. Whether it was the battle for the right to the throne or the counterattack launched by the ministers after the decline of the royal family, they all showed how ridiculous this kind of childish politics was. Daenerys sat on the Iron Throne with a solemn expression for more than 10 minutes before she raised her head and said, "Divide the 7 kingdoms into smaller pieces of land and enfeoff them to more nobles. Don't give any family the right to manage the region and have them swear allegiance to the king. This is the suggestion you want to express, right?" "Absolutely. I admit that this will greatly increase the pressure of management, so I also suggest that you set up an academy, just like the City of Learning that has been turned into ruins. It will specially train the appropriate management talents for the royal family and give them the corresponding rights, but not the titles of nobles. This will make it a brand new political force that can compete with the nobles. This way, the royal family, the old nobles, and the new bureaucrats will form a stable and competitive power system. Before this system loses its balance, you will never have to worry about the power in your hands slipping away," Zhang Qing said as he took a sip of the slightly sour wine. Without a doubt, training a young and beautiful queen from scratch was a very interesting thing. It even made him feel like he was playing a nurturing game. I understand now, Mason. Mason, you are indeed a genius. You can actually build a new ruling structure from scratch. But now, there is a more serious problem between us that needs to be resolved." With that, Daenerys stood up and walked forward with elegant step. She whispered into Zhang Cheng's ear, "Dear, I think you should immediately fulfill your duties as a husband. As a queen, I need a healthy heir. Otherwise, all of this will be nothing more than a beautiful bubble." "Of course, Your Majesty. This is my honor." Zhang Cheng curled his lips slightly, put down the wine cup, and began to untie the other party's belt. Not long after, a seductive voice sounded from the tightly shut conference room. The maidservants of the Kingsguard who were guarding the door exchanged glances with each other. They quickly pretended not to hear anything and continued to perform their duties. However, no one knew that Zhang Qing had actually lost the ability to reproduce, even in this cloned body. Fortunately, creating life wasn't a difficult task for a Titan who was proficient in magic. While Daenerys was immersed in her primitive instincts and desires, he quietly injected the seed of life into her body and quickly condensed it into a healthy embryo. Before long, this embryo would slowly grow into a healthy fetus and become the legal heir of Ironnet. At the same time, it would also be the only hero who could fight against the undead army in the extreme north in the future. In the script that had already been written, Zhang Qing arranged a role for everyone and waited for Valenti to make up his mind to stay in this world. Chapter 989. The bitterly cold winds from the far north were a constant nightmare for the Night Watchers. Recently, many people had noticed an incredible phenomenon. The days were getting shorter and shorter, while the nights were getting longer and longer. The surrounding temperature was also getting lower and lower by the day. It was as if everything was indicating that the long summer was about to end, and the dreadful winter was about to arrive. The seasons in the Song of Ice and Fire were different from the seasons on Earth, which were divided by 3 months. The seasons in the Song of Ice and Fire were different. The seasons here usually lasted for a long time, especially after the long summer ended. It was often followed by 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 years of winter. During this process, the food supply would be severely reduced due to the low temperature and lack of light. Many civilians would starve or freeze to death due to lack of food, clothing, and fuel. To the people of Westeros, especially the Northerners, winter was like a white god of death. It was not as beautiful as described by poets, and every time it appeared, it would be accompanied by a terrible disaster. However, as an outsider, Valenti was not as worried about the arrival of winter as the other Night Watchers. Instead, he focused all his attention on finding traces of other ghosts. This was because he understood that as he wasted more time in this world, there were fewer and fewer choices left. Although he still had some information that a certain someone urgently needed, he did not dare to use it as a bargaining chip. Unfortunately, this poor guy didn't realize that he was already on Zhang Cheng's blacklist from the moment he proposed the terms of exchange. Damn it! I hate this damn weather. These white snowflakes have been falling since 2 days ago, and I don't know when they'll stop. A young Night Watcher gritted his teeth and cursed in a low voice while trudging through the knee-deep snow. Stop complaining. If I were you, I'd save my energy. Try to get back to Dark Castle before it gets dark. Who knows what will happen if we don't? Another Night Watcher spat out a mouthful of hot air. The terrifyingly low temperature had caused frostbite to appear on the faces of the patrol members. Their beards and eyebrows were covered in white frost. In such a terrifyingly low temperature, not to mention eating and drinking, even excreting could only be done in the pants. Otherwise, once the pants were taken off, a person could freeze to death in the blink of an eye. Warrant took a deep breath as he watched the clumsy movements of the Night Watchers. He carefully hid behind a huge rock wall and didn't follow the Night Watchers, because his ability could already clearly sense that danger was quietly approaching. Among them, the Night Watcher at the front was emitting a thick death aura that was about to materialize. Under such circumstances, unless a god descended, it was impossible to change his fate of imminent death. Just as the ignorant young man was about to turn around and say something to his companions, hundreds of figures suddenly emerged from the canyon ahead. Due to the heavy snow, visibility was not very high, so he could not see the faces of these people for the time being. However, according to the experience of the night watchers, other than the barbarians, it was impossible for a large number of residents of the Seven Kingdoms to appear north of the Great Wall. Therefore, without saying a word, they immediately drew their swords and shouted, "Stop! Don't get any closer. We are the Night Watchers. If you don't want to die, back off immediately." Silence. Complete silence. Apparently, the other party had no intention of responding at all. They only swayed their bodies and moved forward slowly, not caring about the warning at all. "Damn it. Looks like we are in trouble. Matt, quickly get on the horse and report back." The leader shouted at the young man who was complaining non-stop. However, before the latter could get on the horse, a spear completely made of ice pierced through the air and pierced through the poor guy's chest, nailing him to the ground. The location of the spear was very accurate. It pierced through one of the most important organs in the human body, the heart. "No! Matt has been killed." The older night watcher glanced at the corpse and immediately shouted in panic. If it were not for the rule of the night watchers that anyone who escaped from a battle would be executed without exception, he would definitely climb onto his horse and flee back to the land of the Seven Kingdoms. Even being a free bandit was better than being killed. Get ready for battle. There are no cowards in Night's Watch. Even if we die, we have to bring a few barbarians with us. Noticing that the enemy had silently surrounded his patrol team, the leader immediately gave the order to fight to the death without hesitation. After hundreds of years of vendetta, Night's Watch and the barbarians outside the Great Wall were like fire and water. There was nothing to talk about. Under normal circumstances, unless one party was completely annihilated in the wild, there would be no stopping. However, the leader soon realized that he had made a mistake. An unimaginably huge mistake. What he encountered were not savages at all, but a group of dead corpses. Some of them had been exposed to the extreme cold for a long time, and their skin was gray and pale. Their eyes even flashed with a bone-piercing blue light. "Who can tell me what the hell is this?" "Ah! Monster. A monster that came back from the dead. Run. There is no way we can defeat such a monster." In just a few seconds, the pitiful night watcher fell into a state of despair. The courage to fight to the death that had been built up with great difficulty disappeared in an instant. They ran in all directions without looking back. They might be willing to fight the barbarians who also had bodies of flesh and blood, but they would never fight the undead that they could not understand. Perhaps it was due to superstition, or perhaps there were too many horror stories about monsters in the northern region. In short, the undead were monsters that could make ordinary people tremble in fear, even if they were not much stronger than humans. Thud! Thud! Accompanied by the rhythmic sound of hooves, a group of deviant ghosts riding death horses finally rushed out and caught up with the night watchers who had lost their courage to fight. With ice arrows flashing in white coldness, they beheaded the night watchers. Dazzling red blood spurted out more than a meter high on the spot. Then, with the inertia, the night watchers ran forward for a few more steps before they fell into the snow with a bang. Cold. Ruthless.